And Mr. Simoni, just so you know, we're going to turn your camera off. It's good that you did that check, but our protocol is we'll turn the cameras on as your items come up and as you're ready to speak. And you won't be able to unmute yourself until we actually get to your item.
Good morning, everyone. Mr. Lawford, are you ready to begin?
Yes, we look like we have a quorum of the board and we have everything running as needed.
Okay, thank you very much. Again, good morning, everyone. My name is Joaquin Esquivel. I'm chair of the State Water Board. Today is Tuesday, January 5th. It is 9 o'clock, and I'd like to call this meeting to order. Happy New Year to everyone, first and foremost. And I'll begin, as I customarily do, introducing my fellow colleagues here. With us is Vice Chair Doreen Diadamo, Board Member Dan Doduck, Board Member Sean McGuire, and Board Member Laurel Firestone. We also have our Executive Director, Eileen Sobek, with us, our two Chief Deputies, Eric Oppenheimer and Jonathan Bishop, our Chief Counsel, Michael Lawford, and our Clerk of the Board, Janine Townsend, and assisting her today is Courtney Tyler. And welcome back, Courtney. So with that, we obviously are webcast and recording today's meeting. In order to comply with the governor's directives and COVID restrictions, we don't actually have a physical meeting room today. Instead, we are on this virtual platform. You're either viewing us by one of two ways. You're either on the Cal EPA website stream, viewing us there, or the YouTube live stream that we have. If you intend to comment on any one of our agenda items today, you should actually be here on the Zoom platform with us. If you are not and you intend to comment on one of the items, please do look at the instructions at the top of today's agenda to get a password and get onto the platform with us. Or you can email our clerk of the board at commentletters@waterboards.ca.gov and you can be assisted. So, and when you, as we go through today's proceeding, everyone's cameras will be off. You'll be asked to share your camera and unmute once it is your time to comment on one of today's items. With that out of the way, then we move on to public forum. Public forum is something that we host here at the board, an opportunity for anyone to speak to the board on an item that is actually not pending before the board or an item on today's agenda. And I believe we don't have any public speaker cards this morning, so we will skip over public forum. That brings us to then our first item on our agenda, which is the consideration of adoption of the December 15th board meeting minutes. So I'll entertain a motion unless there are any further edits from any of the board members upon reading the minutes.
I'll move adoption of the minutes.
Great.
I'll second.
Thank you. Ms. Townsend, can you please call the roll call vote?
Certainly. Vice Chair Diadamo.
Aye.
Board Member Firestone.
Aye.
Board Member Doduck.
Aye.
Board Member McGuire.
Aye.
Chair Esquivel.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you as well. And the vote carries and the board meeting minutes are adopted. Thank you, everyone. Next, we are on to item number 2, which is an item from our Administrative Hearings Office. As some of you may or may not know, our Administrative Hearings Office is actually a newer office here at the State Water Board and has been actually quite active, beginning to be quite active. And so we really do appreciate the work that our Chief Administrative Hearings Officer, Alan Lilly, has been doing and conducting. And this item is a consideration of a proposed order, which is imposing administrative civil liability on James V. Simoni for failure to timely file annual supplemental statement of water diversion and water use for water rights statement S000486 for 20 diversions and use. So with that, I'll hand it over to Mr. Lilly.
So good
Good morning, Chair Esquivel and members of the board. Can you hear me okay? Okay, I see nods, so that looks good. And we do have the PowerPoint presentation up, so thank you very much. So my name is Alan Lilly. I'm the presiding hearing officer of the Water Board's Administrative Hearings Office, and I'm here to present agenda item 2. Next slide, please. This agenda item concerns a proposed order prepared by my office on the administrative civil liability complaint that the Division of Water Rights issued against James Simoni regarding his statement of water diversion and use S000486. Next slide, please. And just by way of a quick background, the respondent's predecessors filed the initial statement of water diversion and use for this matter in 1967. The board's regulations require the respondent to file a supplemental statement of water diversion and use for each year. The filing deadline for the supplemental statement for the 2018 diversions and use was July 1 of 2019. Respondent did not file his supplemental statement for the 2018 diversions until June 9 of 2020, which was 344 days after the filing deadline. Next slide, please. So in regarding this late filing, this slide summarizes what the Division of Water Rights, what actions they took. In February of 2019, the division notified the respondent of the July 1 deadline for filing the supplemental statement. And then on August 30 of 2019, the division sent respondent a notice of deficiency for the failure to file. And that notice did inform the respondent of the potential monetary penalties for the late filing. October 19 of 2019, the division issued its administrative civil liability complaint against the respondent. Next slide, please. Under the complaint, the division's complaint stated that the total maximum potential civil liability for the failure to file was $54,000 based on, at that time, a late filing of 108 days and a penalty of $500 per day. The ACL complaint recommended a smaller amount of $2,000 in administrative civil liability. Next slide, please. The Division of Water Rights included a settlement offer with the complaint. This is a public offer, so it is part of the record, even though settlement discussions sometimes are not. In that complaint, the division offered to settle for a reduced civil liability amount of $500 in exchange for the respondent agreeing to file the supplemental statement that was required within 20 days of receipt of the complaint, sign a settlement form, and then pay the settlement amount within 30 days. And the respondent did not accept the division's settlement offer. Next slide, please. So the proceedings by my office began when the respondent requested a hearing on the administrative civil liability complaint. It took a little while. My office was just getting started, and it took a little while for us to be ready to conduct hearings, but we did issue the notice in April of last year, April 15 of 2020, the notice of hearing, which among other things, it specified the hearing date, but it also required the respondent to file a notice of intent to appear if he wanted to actually appear and participate in the hearing. We gave just over 6 weeks for the respondent to file that notice of intent to appear, and he did not do that by that time. He did contact my office in late June after the deadline and asked to reschedule the hearing, and we did that. We weren't required to do so, but to accommodate respondent's request, we rescheduled the hearing for July 24th, and then in fact did conduct the hearing on that date. We have 90 days under the statute to get our proposed order to the board, and we did meet that deadline and submitted our proposed order to the board on October 21st of last year. Next slide, please. I won't go through the whole order. It's relatively self-explanatory, and obviously you've all seen copies of it. And of course, we sent copies to the prosecution team and the respondent. It's undisputed that the respondent filed the supplemental statement for 2018 after the filing deadline, which subjected the respondent to administrative civil liability. So the question here is what amount, if any, of civil liability should the board impose on respondent? And there are two different statutes which are listed here, which both list the same 4 factors that the board is to consider in deciding what amount of civil liability to impose. And then also, in addition to these 4 listed factors, the statutes also say all relevant circumstances, including these. So there actually end up being 5 different factors. In the following slides, we'll go through those. So next slide, please. The first factor is the extent of harm caused by the violation. Mr. Cervantes for the prosecution team from the Division of Water Rights Enforcement section testified in some detail about this, how as a general rule in California, the information included in the annual water right reports, including supplemental statements of diversion and use, is critical for the board and the division to be able to administer water rights and manage water supplies in California. And he testified that without that accurate reporting, the board's ability to determine availability of water, to manage water supplies, especially during droughts, and to evaluate and respond to complaints, in addition to several other factors he listed, would be compromised, again, without that accurate reporting and the use and the accurate data in the reports. Next slide, please. Regarding the next factor, statutory factor, nature and persistence of the violation, we note that this is an action just for the failure to file the annual supplemental statement for 2018. The board never brought any actions against respondent for late filing of the supplemental statements for 2009 through 2017, even though those were filed in some cases several years after the deadlines. And this present action is not asking for civil penalties for those late filings, but that is a factor that the board may consider in determining the nature and persistence of the violation. And then also the division pointed out that the supplemental statement for 2018 was filed late despite the division's efforts, and they said that also goes to the nature and persistence of the violation. Next slide, please. The length of time of violation, the next statutory factor, as I mentioned, here the respondent did not file the supplemental statement until 344 days after the filing deadline. And this was after the division had taken extensive efforts to notify the respondent of the requirement and actually had prepared and served the ACL complaint. And the division testified during the hearing, the value of the data in the annual water right reports is diminished when the reports are not timely filed and the data are not timely provided. Next slide, please. Corrective actions or lack of corrective actions. Here, was not just a case of filing the statement, but the statement that was filed had some significant deficiencies. And again, this is not an action specifically regarding the inaccuracies of the statement, but the inaccuracies do go to whether or not there was adequate corrective action here. Respondent, at least through the filing of this statement, and I believe even through today, as far as we know, has not measured the amounts of his diversions. The statement contains very serious inaccuracies, and we explained this in the proposed order. He said he diverted 6,000 acre feet in 2018 to irrigate 100 acres, which would come to almost 60 feet of water being 60 feet deep on the land, which obviously is very seriously inaccurate. The respondent's statement for 2019, which he did file on time in 2020, but it does have the same problems of no measurements of the diversions and the same grossly inaccurate diversion amounts. Next slide, please. Finally, as I mentioned, the statutes do allow the board to consider other relevant circumstances. And here, as the order goes into quite a bit of detail, the respondents really has just demonstrated a general unwillingness to attempt to comply with the applicable statutory and regulatory requirements. As I mentioned earlier, did not file the NOI on time for the hearing, which required us to go through some machinations and work with the prosecution team to reschedule the hearing. He's objected to, and argued that the filing requirements do not apply to riparian diverters. which is incorrect under the law. He's objected to the division's electronic filing system for the supplemental statements, even though that filing system is, in fact, specified and required by board regulations, and the board adopted those regulations pursuant to specific statutory authority. And as I said, has failed to determine or even really accurately estimate the diversion amounts in his statements. So we go through this in some detail in the proposed order. I've cited the pages here of the other relevant circumstances. And again, the proposed order does not penalize or criticize the respondent for asking for a hearing. He certainly has a constitutional right to a hearing, and we fully respect that. But I'll just say that the lack of ability, the lack of any willingness to take actions to comply with the statutory and regulatory requirements, we believe is a significant factor here. Next slide, please. So in summary or in conclusion, based on these factors, the proposed order prepared by my colleagues and I recommends or has in it a proposed administrative civil liability amount of $6,000. And that is somewhat more than the amount in the complaint, but that is based on the additional information that my office obtained during the hearing, which the division did not have before it when it prepared the complaint. As I said, just in summary, the critical factors here are the statement was very late, 344 days after the deadline, following very late filings for the prior years of 2009 through 2017. Respondent has not installed devices to accurately measure the amounts of his diversions, which is required by board regulations. Respondent listed grossly inaccurate diversion amounts in the supplemental statement for 2018. Respondent has demonstrated a lack of willingness to attempt to correct the deficiencies, even in the supplemental statement for the next year, 2019. And I'll just say a general unwillingness to comply with statutory and regulatory requirements. So that is a quick summary of our order. Obviously, the proposed order goes into a lot more detail. I will be glad to answer any questions, and also, certain Chair Esquivel, if you want, I will be glad to respond to comments that are made by the other parties, both the prosecution team and the respondent. So with that, I'll stop for now.
Thank you, Mr. Lilly. I don't have any further questions at this point and appreciate the thorough overview. Any board members with any questions for Mr. Lilly? Okay, hearing none at this time, then we can move on to our speaker cards. We have Patrick Lewis here from the prosecution team to speak if needed. I see, but we'll call up Mr. James Simoni first. And I believe you requested 15 minutes, Mr. Simoni. So that 15 minutes is granted.
I'm unfamiliar with this computer things. I'm a gentleman.
Oh, it's okay. We can see you and hear you. Good morning. I'm glad you can join us.
That part of it done. I'd like to make a couple comments. First of all, the board doesn't have any evidence before it. It has a secondary statement by Mr. Lilly, which is untrue. Okay, we have never reported the use of 6,000 acre-feet of water. What happened is we installed our yearly usage or maximum potential usage as we thought the board wanted in this electronic form. The form adds it up. We have many questions when we looked at the new form. First of all, we had to spend days to understand the electronic system. And then to review some of the code sections, we've just had time to do it now. In the ranching enterprise, we only have so much time in the winter to file reports. We have always and faithfully filed our appropriate of water right report with the board. There has never been, and there is not to this day, an unwillingness to file, or even if there was a failure to file, this board must find that we were unwilling and intentionally did not file our report. Now, there was an issue that there was confusion, and it's proven in the record, and I would like to introduce all all of my items that I have sent to the board, including my proposed order for the board, into the record. Because there was in 2009, or when we first saw this report, or when I first saw the report, the first times I ever saw this report, I was not in control of what the answers were supposed to be or what was supposed to happen with it. Ownership did not come into full ownership to where I could report and control the actions until about 2004, because that's when finally the property was deeded to me. And I had to start trying to understand all the reports we have to file about this time of year, which are about 4, and they include other reports with the local water district, which we've had no trouble with all the years we've had dealings with them. Now, our appropriative water right, we file that report every year. As this report started coming in, there was some questions in my mind as to what we were reporting, because I did not remember all of the old items that my family was dealing with and what they instructed me to do. And in 1967, when this was filed, I was only in high school. This was over 50 years ago. Okay, in fact, it's probably 60 years ago. So when I started doing this and I looked at the report, I filled it out as it was an appropriate water right report, because that's what I thought we were reporting on. Okay, then I started reviewing files and documents, and I'm thinking, well, maybe they want something more. So I called the board many times, but I got this recording that said all lines are busy. I could never get through. So I filled out the report as best as I could and sent it in. Okay, this is when we were filing paper reports. And even in that time, there was some confusion in our mind as to what this report wanted, because the appropriate water right certainly had to be filed. We knew that, or I knew that. But the question I had was, why are they asking us to file on a riparian right? I had never had a chance to review the code section. I was a simple rancher, okay, in these matters. So I tried to fill out the report using both at one time riparian and appropriative, and it was unclear, and it's still unclear in my mind about what they want us to do. Do they want us to include in the riparian right what we pump up into storage? Do they want us to include in the riparian right what is supposed to be put from the reservoir and the appropriative right? Because they're all part of the same watershed. Okay, so we were unclear, and I wanted to ask somebody some questions, and nobody could answer me, and nobody wanted to talk to me. That's really what it came down to. Now, in 2004, 2006, you'll find that my report that was part of the record shows that we were thought at first that we were filing for an appropriative water right. Then in 2009, we still thought we were dealing with an appropriate water right, and the quantity of water only dealt with what was in the dam, which is 150 acre feet. There's no any thought ever that we were asking or that we reported 6,000 acre feet. Your computer program added the numbers. We were trying to figure out where do we put these numbers to show that when we were drawing water. Now, most of the water, the cattle and the domestic, was drawn all year. So in the past, what we would do is simply put our yearly totals every month so that you would see that we were drawing all of our water during the year. Now, before, in one of the older forms, we were able to check a box, and the box said, okay, here, check the months you're drawing water in. So all the boxes are checked. And evidently, from your records, I've seen that's what my father evidently did. He checked all the boxes all the way across, okay? Not unlike what I tried to do by putting all the numbers in, because the form will not accept a checkbox. The form demands a number. That's not appropriate when you're asking people to file for a return. The measuring device that Mr. Lilly says that I'm supposed to install, he's wrong. In 1840, you're only supposed to install a measuring device if, in fact, you are diverting more than 10 acre feet of water. Okay? The appropriate water right we have is a reservoir. And in fact, we have a measuring device there. That's how I get the 150 acre feet. That's how I know that our maximum usage of the ranch, which I reported in each of the months, was about 500 to 800 acre feet of water. Okay. But
I don't mean to interrupt you there, but Mr. Simoni, on that point, if you're saying you're using 500 acre feet of water a month, that's what adds up to
maximum use.
Yes, but that's what adds up to the 6,000 acre feet a year that we're assuming you're reporting to have diverted off of the riparian.
500 acre feet of water per year. That's our maximum usage. That's what we were trying to report.
Yeah, and I think, and that's where the confusion is. It's obvious that the form is asking you for your monthly diversion, not what your maximum for the year would be for that month.
Correct, but we have no way. We have a measuring device that shows our diversion. We can't get to it during the wintertime, okay, when we file these reports. But the form in my mind is an electronic form. It didn't allow me to check boxes. It didn't allow me to put in a sufficient remarks so I could understand what they wanted. So that's why I called the board. I have been trying to file an appropriate form for some time, okay? But when in fact it asked for monthly use, we were not drawing those waters except in our dam. In the wintertime, we don't pump. So what you're asking for as far as monthly use goes, we store it in the reservoir and we let our cattle drink with it. If in fact we can irrigate, we try and irrigate. But we can never guarantee from year to year that that's what's going to have to happen. Now, what we tried to do is to fill it out similarly to what my father had done. We tried to fill in our maximum usage, and we knew, trying to say somehow in the electronic form that we were doing that every year. I mean, not, yeah, yearly, but all during the year, okay, is what we've tried to do. I just submitted our 2020 form to your board, and it shows that last year we had no irrigation because everything is in disrepair. We have broken equipment. We couldn't get into the creek to do any kind of irrigating because we had about a half acre we were irrigating before over the last 3 or 4 years. And I've submitted that form, and it shows that our usage for domestic and cattle is below 10 acre feet per year. And that has been that way even in 2018 and other times. So there is no need for us legally to file a report. But we've been struggling to figure out while we're trying to run the ranch as to what we were able to do or what we can report. It has not been our intent to work at cross purposes with the board. If you will look at my materials, you will see that we have worked with this board before when I was in high school, and that they have reported and are fully knowledgeable of what diversion works there are in the Uvis Valley, because they filed the report of referee in the case of Simoni versus Mellon, when we were trying to determine what the riparian rights of the creek were for each party and each user. And it specifies there how many irrigable acres every person has. So there was no intent on my part, and it's legally impermissible to assume that I had an intent not to file or to not fill in the electronic form as best as I could to inform the board of what our usage could be. Okay, and that's what we were wondering. What is it that the report is for? If in fact you're trying to determine history as to what's been used, or are you trying to plan for the future? My understanding was that you're trying to plan for the future so that this board could determine what the needs of everybody is during the water problems that we have. Our needs were specified in my report. That's what we were trying to explain to you. 500 acre feet per year is what we were trying to show you. It might rise as high as 800 feet per year. The computations are a little difficult because the cattle, you can't measure. There's no way you can have a measuring device as to how much they're drinking. All you can do is estimate it. So as far as ever getting actual use from cattle usage, you're not going to get it. It can't be done. As far as domestic use, again, the amounts are so small compared to what this board has to administer. There's no need to measure, and we have to do it by computation or estimates, which is fine with us because we've done that with the local Santa Clara Valley Water Board for years. And that is what I tried to contact the board about after the 2009 report, because we were concerned that one day someone's going to misinterpret this thing. Okay, if we can't figure out exactly what the board wants. And that's what I've been trying to do all this time. And then someone simply comes in and says, well, no, we're not going to talk to you. What we're going to do is tell you, oh, you need to file this report, and you failed. There was an oversight in 2018. We thought we had filed them all because we had filed all our reports that we knew of, or I did anyway. And then when I looked at it in 2020, because of this board, I sent a letter when I was accused of not having filed my report. I sent a letter to Mr. Lilly, or an email, and I said to him, we filed. Look, here they are. And I copied all of them and included them in my June 9th, 2020 email to Mr. Lilly. And here they are. I said, why are you doing this? I have no response. But I did realize as I went back after my letter and looked at the reports, I realized there was a discrepancy because these are electronic reports, remember. I'm not able to get to paper anymore, which is what I'm used to dealing with. So when I realized that this report, something was missing, well, then I started filing the rest of them. Okay, but then the question became, are the tanks on the hill supposed to be included? And if those refillings are supposed to be put in as storage? So I divided the amount, about 500 acre feet. I said, well, half of it it's in storage because there's 150 acre feet with the reservoir. And then I don't know exactly how much this going up and back down to the tank in our consumption is working, but I got to get these reports on file. So that is how this particular report became the way it is. Now in my 2020 report, which I file it on paper. And I broke down the usages that we had last year because there's no irrigation last year, and we had cattle and we had domestic use. That's it. So with that, it's pretty clear in those estimated usages by the materials given to us by the Santa Clara Valley Water District that in fact we had certainly less than 10 acre feet. We are only using about 2.8, I believe it was, 2.08 acre feet of water a year. And this is a very small amount of water compared to what this board has to work with. But in the Uvis Valley, we have been involved in the water rights for many years. We are not required to install a measuring device for our domestic system because it's under 10 acre feet. And if there's no irrigation, or if the irrigation is very small, like a half acre, I haven't computed the half acre requirements, but I think we're going to be way below 10 acre feet. My concern when filling out the report was I thought that this board wanted to see what our maximum usage is. We don't have any recollection of what usage there is in past years, but what we are trying to do is to this year file what the 2020 use actually was rather than our potential use and our desired use, because the Constitution requires that we can, as it's worded, what you're able to use or what you can adapt, the purposes to which your property can be used is not supposed to be interfered with as well, because there's a constitutional mandate there. Now, my concern is that, first of all, it is illegal to impose a civil penalty, and this board will be violating civil rights by illegally imposing a civil penalty unless there is a finding of willfulness. And there is none here. There's no willful desire not to file. There is time constraints. There is difficulty in understanding your form. There is a problem with trying to figure out how to use a computer system, because it is not my forte. And the difficulty I have is that I don't think that Mr. Lilly's office should interpret a form that I can't control as something I'm reporting, because it is not something I'm reporting. And I provided in my materials a declaration under penalty of perjury of what I know to be the truth, not what that form was sitting in and putting into your system.
Okay, Mr. Simoni, I do appreciate your comments. You've gone a bit over 15 minutes now. So if there's any last minute thoughts you'd like to kind of wrap up with, please do. And then Mr. Lilly, perhaps you can come in. I do have a few questions and some clarifying thought as well. But Mr. Simoni, if you have a final thought, I'll
my final thoughts are that I wanted to talk to someone at the system, your system, what the system should look like, because I believe that the regulations don't comply with the code sections now that I've studied it. 1840 and 923 are at odds. One says divert, the other says authorized. So what I'm trying to explain to the board is there are serious problems with the system. It doesn't mean, like Mr. Lilly seems to interpret, that I am unwilling to file. I have filed my 2020 already as proof of my willingness to file. I think our history of filing on our appropriate or broader right, which is unquestioned, is also a component of our willingness. I think anybody from the water board, local water district would testify on my behalf that they were more than willing to comply, because we meet with them every year. And we have also filed reports for them when I was in charge of property that required their reports. That's all I can put at this point. But I think there are serious problems with the system. I'd be happy to work with the board staff to help remedy them. I would also be happy as my time permits, but you can understand we're severely impacted in trying to make this place work, as well as trying to make a living. Now, my last comment is that the reason I have time now is because it's raining. This is the time of the point of the year when most of our agricultural farmers and people in this part of the county do this kind of work. We have time now, a little bit of time to do this, but I've spent days trying to understand this and up nights, sleepless nights, trying to figure this out. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Simoni. Maybe Mr. Lilly, I do have a couple of questions. I think, well, first and foremost, Mr. Simoni, quite simply, these are statements of diversion. So the board is expecting to understand what you diverted in the previous water year. That's simple as I can make it on that. It sounds like there may be some confusion, or some of the issue here may be the difference between your appropriative right and your riparian right, and the responsibilities and need for data therein. The other comment I will just make as well is your comment on intent is not really applicable. You can think of this as you run a traffic light. Whether you intended to run that traffic light to not obey the regulation is less sort of consequence than the fact that it was late. Here, your diversion, your statement of diversion, and again, I think I wouldn't put necessarily your intent. It sounds like your intent here is clearly to try to understand what it is the board has been requesting of you. But Mr. Lilly, I don't know, do you have any comment to help the board understand here the situation?
I would be glad to respond, Chair Esquivel. You might want to hear from Mr. Lewis first, though.
That's fair. Actually, then yes, Mr. Lewis from the prosecution team, if there's anything that you would like to add before Mr. Lilly, I think that's appropriate.
Good morning, Chair Esquivel, board members. The division prosecution team has reviewed AHO's proposed order and believes it adequately reflects the facts and evidence presented to the hearing officer at hearing. The division supports the adoption of the proposed order, and I'm available to answer any questions that the board may have either now or after Mr. Lilly has been given an opportunity to respond.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis.
So Chair Esquivel, would you like me to just respond briefly now?
Sure. Yes, that would be great. Thank you, Mr. Lilly.
All right. Thank you. I will say Mr. Simoni is raising some new arguments that we did not hear during the hearing, which is a little bit of a challenge for us, particularly the confusion between appropriative rights and riparian rights. But I think there just are two points that I would like to make, which I think really do track the proposed order. First of all, Mr. Simoni is correct that the old paper forms allowed people to just put X's in. Did you divert water in April of 1975? X, yes, you did not have to list the number. The new electronic forms, he is correct, do not allow that. They require numbers. And of course, the purpose of that, I think, as Mr. Cervantes testified during the hearing, is because the board and the Division of Water Rights need to have actual numbers to administer water rights in California. So that's why that change was made. And frankly, that's why the legislature passed the statute that adopted, it was Water Code 1841, that authorized the board to adopt the electronic reporting requirements. And then the board did adopt regulations on that. So it is a new world, and it does require more detailed reporting. And I understand now what Mr. Simoni is saying is, well, we think we might have diverted 500 acre feet per year, but we didn't know what month that was in, so we just put 500 acre feet down for all 12 months. And of course, that does total 6,000. And what we concluded in the proposed order is that's just not sufficient to comply with the reporting requirements. And then the other point is this confusion between appropriative and riparian rights. There was some allusion to that during the hearing, although a lot more is coming out now than we heard then. But basically, if somebody diverts water in California, they do have a responsibility to file accurate reports. And that's what the problem is here, is that the reports are not accurate. He does have an appropriative claim and a riparian claim, but he needs to sort out how much is diverted under each. And we're not talking about how much cows drink. It's the diversion amounts, which we're talking about, which can be measured. So the bottom line on that is he has alluded to trying to call the division staff a few times and not getting responses. And it was pretty vague during the hearing, and it's still fairly vague as to exactly when he tried and exactly what he did. He started on this process back in 1995, so he's had almost 25 years to sort this out. And of course, there are sometimes getting through to government agencies is challenging, and one has to persist. And there are other resources that the board and the division have good website resources. And perhaps most importantly, if Mr. Simoni needed technical assistance, he should hire somebody to do that. There are tens of thousands of people file these reports every year in California, and the ones who need help get help. And I look at it somewhat of an analogous to the situation of filing tax returns. Just because you can't get through to the IRS doesn't mean you're off the hook to meet your tax return by the deadline. And for many people, they're very complicated and they need to get technical help. And I think that's the situation we have here, that if it's complicated, Mr. Simoni should have gotten technical help. And then the only other thing, Chair Esquivel, you alluded to this already, the question of intent. I don't think there's an intent requirement here. What Mr. Simoni's filing cited a Court of Appeal decision regarding a totally different statutory scheme where the statute specifically said there was need to find a willfulness of a violation for there to be civil penalties. But that's not what we have here. These are simply reporting requirements, and the board is allowed to impose administrative civil liability if the reports are not filed on time, which has happened here. It's not really a question of intent. Intent or willfulness can determine the amount of the penalty, but not the threshold question of whether a penalty is appropriate. So I won't go over anything else unless the board members have any questions, but I do think we considered this matter in detail. Our proposed order certainly goes through all the points that we think are important, and we responded to what the points Mr. Simoni raised during the hearing. So I recommend that the board adopt the proposed order as we prepared it and submitted it to the board.
Thank you, Mr. Lilly. Other board members with questions and thoughts? Yes, please, Vice Chair.
Thank you. I have some questions of Mr. Lewis regarding the call log information that's contained in the proposed order. So I see here on page 8 that the division staff testified that staff are trained to respond to calls, and that there was a call log showed from Mr. Simoni on June 15th, but there's not much detail in here about that. And so for me, I would just like to get a little more information about the call log. And also, I think that the draft order does a good job talking about the significant outreach efforts. You know, we're very much aware of that as a board because of the information items that come before us regarding staff outreach efforts. But if you could expand upon that as well, and also any additional information about what's on the website that provides assistance.
Yes, Vice Chair, thank you for the opportunity. So the division does make every reasonable effort to notify the regulated community of the reporting requirement. As part of that, an email address is provided and a phone number is also provided. Diverters can email this email address or call the phone number that gets a voicemail and they're directed to leave a message. Staff is trained to look at those call logs, return those calls to be able to help the regulated community with the reporting requirement. The same goes for the email address as well. In preparation for this case, we did go back and we looked at the call logs and the email to verify if we had received any contact from Mr. Simoni. We did not see that we had received any contact from Mr. Simoni regarding the reporting requirements, except for the call that's noted in the proposed order. And this was well after the report was required. Additionally, the division does make numerous resources available in order to assist diverters with the reporting requirement. Of these, there's in-person technical meetings where we can sit down with diverters and we can walk them through the process. Also, as I previously mentioned, there is this phone number and there is the email address. We also go to even greater lengths to notify the regulated community by sending out tweets for those that are proficient with social media. We also send out Lyris blasts for those that subscribe to the email address. And these occur every year with the reporting cycle. This wasn't a one-time operation, and these practices have been in effect since at least 2017. Does that answer your question, or would you like me to go into further detail?
That's helpful. Thank you.
I have a question for Mr. Lewis as well. So, clearly it sounds like Mr. Simoni has some ongoing confusion about his appropriative versus riparian water right reporting requirements. And so he stated that he has filed his appropriative water rights reporting on time every year. And so I was just wondering if that came up in your review here of this record, and if you could speak to kind of his history of filing, at least for that water rate.
Unfortunately, Board Member McGuire, I do not have the information on the appropriative right at my fingertips. I could ask staff to pull that up and I can provide that to you. But maybe to expand a little further on your question, this was a topic that had been discussed during the hearing, as Mr. Lilly mentioned. And during that, Mr. Simoni did provide numerous documents in the past related to his reporting. And during the hearing, we were able to show that Mr. Simoni was aware of the difference between his riparian right and his appropriative right, and that it had been so noted on his filings.
Mr. Simoni, you're looking to respond there? You should be invited to unmute here in a moment.
What I want the board to understand is, first of all, that the appropriative water right that we filed, we were delayed 1 year when the electronic system came into effect, and we were trying to figure out a way to do our reporting in that system. Once we had that going, then we have been faithfully filing our reports, because this is the time of year we try to do all this kind of work. Now, Mr. Lewis's comment about we knew the difference, I did not know any difference, and the records that I shared with the board at the time were when I didn't own the water right. These are not things that I kept in memory. I simply did my job as a gnome or a administrator, someone writing on behalf of someone else. And there was none of those records were in my memory as far as trying to figure out what we had as far as reporting goes, or whether this particular form dealt with the appropriative water right or the riparian water right. We felt that, or I felt that they all dealt with the appropriative water right. And there's evidence in the record of that, because I filed a report that basically said, under this water right, this riparian water right they're talking about, and I clearly put appropriative. It was a handwritten report at the time, and that's what we thought. That's what I thought I was filing for. And I tried in 2012 specifically to get more information from the board. Mr. Lilly's comment that there's plenty of resources out there. There's only so much time. I can only do so much as an individual person. And I disagree with him heartily in the fact that you don't have to show a willingness. This is not a stoplight situation. This is a civil penalty situation. And there's law in the books that say you have to have a finding of willingness here. There's no evidence of willingness. Nothing that this board has been presented today is evidence. The only evidence that you have before you is my declaration under penalty of perjury. And there has been never a desire or a unwillingness to late file a report. Never. Okay. Our board we have always tried to work with the board. We've always tried to be good citizens. There are difficulties, and I'm not going to take any more of your time, but I don't want to see this board doing illegal acts. This proposed order needs serious reworking because it draws conclusion based on wrong evidence. The evidence.
I appreciate the response. You answered my question, and Mr. Lewis, thank you as well. You've clarified for me what I was wondering about as it relates to reporting, so appreciate that.
Thank you, board member. Any other thoughts and or questions from fellow board colleagues?
If I could ask a question of Mr. Simoni, I appreciate your disagreement with the proposed order before us, but I'm curious and perhaps more importantly, focused on the future and how we move forward, how we help you move forward. And so knowing what you know now, having been through this process, what would you do differently, and how might our staff assist you in filing future statement of diversions that would be timely and accurate?
In the future, I intend to file every year. I've never had a desire not to file every year. If I can especially file in this time period, we can't deal with these things in the summer months. We only have so much time to go out and do our work in the fields. Right now, I'm trying to schedule a branding betwixt all the rain, which is always a challenge during this time period. Okay, so
Mr. Simoni, may I ask, do you measure your diversions? Are they, do you measure the diversions that you take out from your appropriated right and your riparian right?
the way we measure our diversions is we look at the registers on the reservoir. This is also how we can measure our diversions if we irrigate. Now, if in fact we're trying to measure them in any given year, we do that with the Valley Water District. And I've tried in the last 4 or 5 years in determining the appropriative rights. The member of the Santa Clara Valley Water District, we report every year how much we store in our reservoir. Okay, because they have a prior appropriative right to ours. And so they get to know how much we have there in case they want it. Okay, and so what we do is we go up and we look at the measuring device in the spring before, when the rains stop. And then we try and measure, okay, here's how much water you have, 120 acre feet, you spilled. Or you'll find in some of the older reports, I tell the board, your board, that we did not, the water didn't come up to the outlet works level. So there was not enough water in the reservoir to divert any further. Okay, so when we go up and we measure how much we have in the spring. Then in the fall, the water board comes back, not the water board, the water district comes back, and we meet again. We go to the reservoir and we determine how much water is in the reservoir. So we can tell how much drawdown there is and how much we've used of the appropriative water. That's how we do that. Now, we do use the riparian water. The cattle go in and are at certain times of the year are released into the riparian area to take advantage of the grass there, and then they're pulled out. We can't measure that flow, but we do try and measure, make some basic measurements. And that's how I know that if in fact we were irrigating in our maximum capacity, which is what I thought the board wanted, then we would use X amount of water, because when we irrigate with the reservoir, the drawdown goes down in a month.
Okay, I think I understand, Mr. Simoni. Thank you. And I think I understand. And I think to board member Dodek's point, we really should, you should really focus here on the future for future reports, and to Mr. Lilly's suggestion, perhaps get some technical assistance in to ensure that you are providing the right information, which isn't actually the consumptive use from the cattle that we're looking for, but again, how much are you diverting, under what right, and it's simple as that, really. And it's at the point of diversion, as I understand, that we're really looking for the information. But again, I think we won't be able to resolve, I think, wholly your concerns and questions here. But again, to board member Dodek's point, we want to make sure that we're providing you the best basis of technical support. But it's sounding like you're going to need some assistance in understanding both your rights and the reports that you're providing to us here.
Our problem has been trying to understand what you want. Now you say, and I appreciate that. Now you say we're not so concerned about the cattle. That's fine.
Well, it's, again, I wouldn't take, I'm not providing you that technical assistance here in real time, unfortunately. I'm pointing out that generally, again, I think where some of the, the confusion seems to be on, what it is that the board is looking for. Again, we're not looking for projections, not looking for what you believe your total right might be to, but again, your statements of diversion for each of the rights, your riparian and appropriative right, and a timely filing of that. I think Mr. Simoni, if you want to add a few more thoughts, at this point, though, I'd like to leave it for the board members to further discuss amongst ourselves how to proceed. But Mr. Simoni, yes.
If you could provide a staff member who would talk to us, this has been the problem. And that's why in my order that I propose to the board to adopt, I provide that the staff is to contact me so that we can work out exactly what they want. Because it is confusing to me to try and understand exactly how much they want us to measure and because I know what we can't measure. We can't measure how many deer go in there. 30 deer at a time can drink almost as much as our cattle.
We're, again, Mr. Simoni, quite clearly, we're asking for the amount that is being, you yourself are diverting, putting a straw into the stream, pulling out, and putting to use. So that being said, again, thank you. And fellow board members, further thought or questions on this matter. I will say I do appreciate Mr. Lilly's thoroughness on the order. It lays out in quite detail some of the things that we've touched on here, but I again appreciate what we need to focus on, Mr. Simoni, is how we move forward. And here the board will consider the appropriate, I think, liability for this item. So, fellow board members.
Yes, I have a question for Mr. Lilly. So, Mr. Lilly, for me, in reading through the order and the information in the order regarding statements that Mr. Simoni made at the hearing, and also the details that are contained in the order regarding the length of time that passed, I'm very comfortable with the order. But there are some statements in the order that now what is coming before us with what Mr. Simoni is saying, that there seems to be a change of heart. And so in the order, for example, on page 13, the first full paragraph, the last sentence, Mr. Simoni's hearing testimony indicates that he still questions the importance of timely filings and whether it's even necessary for him to file annual reports. And then in going through the order, there are several actual quotes that are consistent with that statement. But now Mr. Simoni is telling us that he intends to file, he's seeking some additional help. And so I just want to get your thoughts on what went into the recommendation on the penalty amount and this whole issue of intent. I agree with what you said, Mr. Lilly and Chair Esquivel. It doesn't go, intent doesn't go to whether or not you're supposed to file a report. Just like, the stoplight or your taxes, you're supposed to file, but it can go to the amount of the penalty. And so it appears that there was some unwillfulness at some point in time that went into the determination on the penalty. And now Mr. Simoni is, perhaps it could be because of this order that outlines the details. It appears that he's willing to comply at this point. But just want to know your thoughts going into the recommendation and whether or not your recommendation would change based upon what appears to be somewhat of a change of heart.
So thank you, Vice Chair Diadamo. These are good questions. And obviously there has been a change of heart, perhaps because of Mr. Simoni's receipt of the proposed order. Obviously, we prepared the proposed order based on the evidence we received at the hearing and the arguments made at the hearing. And at that time, we did not, I did not hear, and I don't think Mr. Simoni demonstrated any real strong willingness to comply in the future. And that obviously has changed today. And that's good, of course, from a state policy point of view. So I do not believe that changes my recommendation for the penalty amount. Because the penalty amount is really based on past actions, not future intent. And I think the $6,000 penalty amount is appropriate based on the evidence we received during the hearing. And frankly, Mr. Simoni's actions through the date of the hearing, and perhaps even through today, when it's a moving target. I have not looked at the statement he filed for this year. That must have just come in recently. So I think the board, I am comfortable with the recommendation and the penalty amount. I guess the board really has two choices. I hate to say we could reopen it and change some of those statements about intent based on Mr. Simoni's statements today. That sort of could get us into an endless do loop of we make changes and then there are further comments, and then we have to address those. So I'm not sure that's necessary. I think the report is legally defensible as written and does not need to be changed. And certainly, to answer your specific question, Vice Chair Yadamo, I do not think, based on what we've heard today, that the amount of the civil penalty should change because that's based on past performance, not intent for the future.
Thank you to Vice Chair Diodamo for asking those questions, because those were my thoughts as well. But upon hearing Mr. Lilly's response, I am comfortable with the proposed order and the proposed amount. So I will move for adoption of this item.
I too am comfortable with this order and with the amount, but I would ask that I think Mr. Lewis had alluded to the ability for water rights staff to provide a technical sit-down discussion with water rights holders to review their reporting requirements. And so I would invite the division staff to reach out to Mr. Simoni here and offer that sit-down discussion so that he does have that opportunity for an in-person review of his water rights. I also strongly encourage Mr. Simoni to retain technical support here or legal counsel to review your water rights, the reporting requirements, and get some help. It sounds like you're busy at different times of the year that are inconvenient when the reporting requirements overlap. I think someone can come in and help you with this to make sure that all the measurement requirements are fulfilled, that the reporting with the water district is accounted for, that your obligations to the board are fulfilled. It's so important that all water right holders, we have tens of thousands, report as they're required to based on their rights. You are one person, I admit, but it's important that everyone complies with our system. We have a very complex water rights system, very complex priority system, as you know. And so I am empathetic to that, and I'm really encouraged by your commitment to report going forward. But we are looking here at the past, and so that's why I'm comfortable proceeding today. So I'll second the motion.
Thank you, board members, and echo board member McGuire's sentiments there, Mr. Simoni.
And Chair Esquivel, before
Yes.
the board moves or calls the question, I did want to provide one brief record housekeeping matter. And that was Mr. Simoni had indicated that there was no evidence before the board. I think all the board members are aware of this, but just so the order of this proceeding reflects it. But of course, the evidentiary hearing was conducted by the Administrative Hearings Office, and the evidentiary submissions did occur in that context. And that record, of course, is available to the board. And then you did receive additional comments on the proposed order as authorized by the Water Code as part of the board's consideration of the order that was submitted to you by the Administrative Hearings Office.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Lawford. And again, to clarify for those watching, this was a proceeding before our Administrative Hearings Office, which was established to work through these complaints and ensure that the water rights system is continuing to function for all of us here. And these data are very critical to California being able to continue to manage its resources. And so, I do want you to feel, Mr. Simoni, that you had a fair hearing and a time here before the board. We're not trying to unduly punish you or single you out here. but simply begin to ensure that there is enforceability and administration of these simple expectations around diversion, and a data point that is really important if you're going to exercise your water rights here in the state. So again, we're here to continue to provide you the support and technical assistance, and don't want you to see this as unduly punitive to you here. And so, and thank you for your sentiments around continuing to comply now here and report. But here I will say, we need to call the roll call vote. So Ms. Townsend, if you can call the vote.
Certainly. Board Member Dodek,
Aye.
Board Member McGuire,
Aye.
Board Member Firestone,
Aye.
Vice Chair Diadamo,
Aye.
and Chair Escobar.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Townsend. The vote carries and the order is adopted. Again, thank you everyone for the good work, and Mr. Simoni, the board is here to continue to be a partner with you and provide, again, that technical assistance. And to Board Member McGuire's suggestion, look forward to hearing about that follow-up from the Division of Water Rights to help provide that technical assistance. Okay, with that, item number 2 is completed then, and we can, let's go ahead and move on to, do we want to take a break? Let's go ahead and take a 10-minute break. We have the room and the schedule here, and come back here then at 10:20. See you all here in a few moments. Hello, everyone. It's 10:21, so 10:22. So I think we should get back here. Where we last left off was proceeding here to item number 3 in a tranche of informational items. And the first item number 3 being our current hydrologic conditions. Wait for folks to jump on here.
Good morning.
Oh, good morning.
Good morning. This is Alessia Siglari. I am an engineer with the Division of Water Rights, and I'm here to present item number 3, hydrology update for the Bay Delta watershed. The presentation will include, as usual, precipitation conditions, snowpack conditions, major reservoir storage conditions, and an update on supplemental water project for term 91, drought update and forecast, and temperature and precipitation forecast. Next slide, please. This first slide shows precipitations totals for different years historical for Northern Sierra. The A station index for January 4, 2021 shows Northern Sierra at 38% of historical average for this date. The dark blue line represents the current daily precipitation of 7.4 inches. You might recall it was 0 at our last update 2 months ago on November 4th, 2020. Last water year, 2019-2020 is represented with the solid black line on the graph. And the water year started in a similar way as the current water year, although December 2019 saw greater precipitation with respect to December 2020. So right now we stand close to the second driest and driest through August water year, 1976-1977. Next slide, please. Same pattern for the San Joaquin Basin. The 5 station index for January 4, 2021 shows Central Sierra 33% of historical average for this day. The dark blue line represents still the current daily precipitation. It's a 4.6 inches. And it's hard to predict, as you can see from this graph, how things will evolve. Curves starts usually in a very similar pattern. We are very close to the same level of precipitation as the 2017-2018 year, and at the same time we're very close to the second driest and driest through August year 1976-1977. So hard to predict still. Next slide, please. And here we have the 6 station index for January 4, 2021, that shows the Southern Sierra at 27% of historical average for this day. Current daily precipitation is at 2.6 inches. As I said before, too hard to predict how things will evolve. We are also in this case really close to the 2017-18 precipitation for this date, and at the same time very close to the driest year 1976-1977. Next slide, please. This slide shows California snow water content. The snow water content is the amount of water contained within the snowpack. It can be thought as the depth of water that would theoretically result if the entire snowpack will melt instantaneously. We are at below average snowpack as we would expect given the low precipitation. Snowpack is 50% of average statewide. And on January 4th, Northern Sierra was at 56% of average, Central Sierra at 56% of average, and Southern Sierra at 31% of average. Next slide, please. Here we have current reservoir conditions. Reservoirs are not in good shape, especially northern reservoirs, which are way below historical average. We have Lake Shasta 45% of capacity and 71% of historical average. Lake Oroville at 35% of capacity and 57% of historical average. Folsom Lake at 29% of capacity and 60% of historical average. The situation gets a little better going to Central California and Southern California. St. Louis is at 47% of capacity and 68% of historical average. Don Pedro Reservoir, 67% of capacity and 101% of historical average. New Malone is 65% of capacity and 112% of historical average. Next slide, please. You're going a little more in detail to understand the trend, how things are going. Lake Oroville, this is a these are Lake Oroville levels for different years. Historically, the blue line represents the current water year. We stand at about 1.2 million acre feet. In the graph, you can see the historical average, which is represented by the full shaded light blue area. And we have other lines that represent several water years. The red line with dots is the driest year on records in 1976, 1977. The other red line with triangles is the 2014-2015, which followed the latest heaviest drought year, the 2013-2014. And we have the green line with diamond shapes that represent the 1982-1983, the wettest year on record. And the green line with triangles is the 1976-1977, which followed the driest year, the 1976 and 1977. As you can see, we started at about above 1.5 million acre feet, and now going down at 1.2 million acre feet, a little below the driest year on record in 1976, 1977. Next slide, please. This is the trend for Lake Shasta. We started at about 2.2 million acre feet. It was a good start for a dry year, but now going down, and we are close to the 2014-2015 level for the same time of the year. Way below average. Next slide, please. Folsom Lake is also below average, and started at about 400,000 acre feet, now stands at about 288,000 acre feet, and unfortunately is similar level as the driest year on record, 1976, 1977. Next slide, please. This is the situation for New Melones. We are slightly above average. This is a larger reservoir for size of the basin and still carrying some water from previous year. Next slide, please. St. Louis Reservoir started the year just above average and now is at about 960,000 acre feet, below average, and as you can see, below all the other curves. So below every other year that we can see depicted in this graph for the same time of the year. Next slide, please. And this is the condition of other reservoir as of January 4th. Cachuma Reservoir was at 64% of capacity and 83% of average. Diamond Valley Lake was at 87% of capacity. In St. Louis reservoirs, we just saw 47% of capacity and 68% of average. Next slide, please. This is an update of Term 91. Term 91 prohibits diversions under permits and licenses subject to the term when the delta is in balance conditions and the satisfaction of in-basin entitlements, including maintenance of delta water quality and flow requirements, require releases of supplemental project water by Central Valley Project or State Water Project. This graph was updated on January 4th. Term 91 is currently not in effect, A notice of lifting of curtailments was sent on December 24, 2020. As of January 4th, there was about minus 1,547 cubic feet per second of flow, in excess of the need of supplemental project water releases, and the delta was in balanced conditions. If the projects are required to continue consistent supplemental project water releases and the delta remains in balanced conditions, Terminal 91 curtailments will be resumed. And as always, this graph is updated weekly on our website. Next slide, please. This is a US drought monitor with the California situation. As you can see, there's not even a little bit of our state that doesn't have any drought condition. Unfortunately, on December 29, about 5% of the state was at abnormally dry conditions, 21% at moderate drought conditions, and about 40% at severe drought, and 32% at extreme drought conditions, and about 1% at exceptional drought conditions. A big difference from last year if you compare the numbers with first row and last row. Next slide, please. Same or even more critical situation for the Colorado Basin. For December 29, the Colorado Basin had presented a 5% of its basin on moderate drought, 7% a severe drought, 22% at extreme drought, and the majority of the basin, 65% at exceptional drought conditions. As before, if we compare with last year, there's a big difference where about 44% of the basin had no drought condition whatsoever. Next slide, please.
Yeah, and I think we all recall that in the last drought, it was the Colorado River Basin and Southern California's access, Metropolitan Water District, San Diego, others, and their access to Colorado River supplies that lessened the impact of the very severe drought that was happening, obviously, in our delta up here. With increased drought on the Colorado River Basin, it is going to mean continued and increased pressure on the Bay Delta as well, and complexities therein in managing our water. So very disconcerting to see.
It doesn't look good. Yeah. This slide presents the U.S. seasonal drought outlook, just focusing on the California area. This is valid for from December 17, 2020 to March 31st, 2021. And as you can see, drought will persist almost everywhere in California, with the small area in Southern California where drought will develop likely. Next slide, please. The slide shows the Colorado River Basin snow water equivalent. It's a little different than the usual graph that we were posting, just because they updated their maps online. So there's some little umbrellas symbols that represent the percentage of average precipitation, and the snowflake symbol that represent the percentage of median snow water equivalent. And color scale, as you can see in the top, from red to purple, indicate from 50 to 150% of average precipitation or percent of median snow water equivalent. As you can see on the graph, just looking at the colors, at the shaded colors of the little areas, which the basin is divided into, we can see that almost half of the basin has no color shades, which means those areas stands on less than 50% of average. The rest of the basin has colors that vary from red to orange and yellow and green, representing that those areas stands at about 50 to 100% of median. Next slide, please. And to conclude the presentation, I will present the 8 to 14 days outlook for precipitation and temperature. Here's the precipitation outlook from January 3rd and valid from January 11 to January 17, 2021. And as you can see, California is at very low chance of, the map shows chances of below average for California, with lower chances of precipitation probability for Central and Southern California. Next slide, please. And here's the temperature probability outlook for the 8 to 14 days for January 3rd, valid from January 11th to January 17th. Temperature outlook shows California at above average temperature, between 60 and 70% of average for the week of the 11th to the 17th of January. And this concludes our presentation. We're here to answer questions if there's any. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Clary. I don't think I have any other questions at this point, other just than to express concern, certainly. We certainly had a dry year last year, as you indicated, we saw, and but for, I know, the precipitation we're having now, and I think anticipated through the week, it looks and sounds like we're drying out thereafter, and unknown, and seen from the forecasts, at least below average precipitation forecasts. So that's going to be a challenge for certainly all of us in the state, and of top of mind for the board as we look at our work for the year ahead, and the challenges that we know dry conditions bring to us, as we just even dealt with here when it comes to reporting diversions, and again, the need for data to be better decision makers within drought. Thank you for the really good hydrologic update here. I think it's appropriate here as we start the year to have this quick check-in, and look forward to future hydrologic updates. Any questions from fellow board members or reflections as well?
I had a couple questions just before we get into reflections. I appreciate totally agree with the reflections, Chair Escobar. Is there a reason why the average only goes to 2015? I have general questions, not trying to suggest something different, but just wondering why we don't, as climate change continues and things evolve, just wondering why we don't continue to have a more running average.
I am not sure why the Department of Water Resources doesn't include newer years. What is certain is that every time you include a new year, the probability calculation changes notably. So it would be hard to compare with previous years. That's my thought, but I'm not sure why.
Okay, just curious, maybe in the future, it'd be interesting to find out. Or you could follow up with me separately. The other question I have is, because one of the pieces of reporting is around reservoir capacity, which I know, there's a number of operational concerns and reasons why there's different reservoir levels. And, obviously it's really important to understand our water supply and the storage available or being used. I'm wondering, just as we're, as a state, expanding the use of groundwater storage and groundwater banking and sort of shifting to more conjunctive use, is it possible to start to have aggregated, kind of estimated of, I know it'd be complex to do, but just storage and banking of surface water recharge within, or groundwater storage in the future, as we start to better understand kind of the water supplies that we have as a state.
Yeah, board member, I'll flag, I think previous hydrologic updates here and again have a slide that DWR provides, which shows groundwater levels, what they were during the drought, what they've, and what we've seen is that we haven't recovered. But to your point, yeah, we should just make it a regular feature or fixture for the hydrologic update.
If you want, I can go through the slide I have as an extra slide after the latest slide.
Yeah.
That'd be great.
What I would like to point out is that we are still using about our 40%, about 40% of the water we use is from groundwater in a regular year, and about 60% in a dry year or drought year. But if you guys can pull up the slides, we can go through them.
Yeah, and just as we look at them, I think one of the things I'm interested in is just how we are thinking about storage. So I know that goes to, probably most important is around sustainability and overall levels, but
I do not have that type of information in the slides. Those represent just the changes of water, groundwater level through 1 year change and 10 years change. But that information can certainly be added to our next update to have a better understanding of where we stand with groundwater and level in the reservoirs.
Great. No, this is great. Thank you. Do you mind going through just this slide?
Sure. This is groundwater level change from spring 2019 to spring 2020. So as you can see, this represents, of course, the physical change in groundwater levels. And you can see that for the 1 year change, the colors represent the percentage of wells that have low to greater amount of changes, with the colors that go from red to orange, yellow, and light green and dark green. And as you can see, the 1 year show that there's an average change of groundwater level. While if you can go to the next slide, this was the previous year. Please, can we go to the next slide? The next one, yeah, the 10-year change. You can see that there's a lot more red and orange, which show that some groundwater basins have not fully recovered from the last drought conditions, specifically in Central Valley, Sacramento River, San Joaquin River, and Tulare Lake hydrologic regions that were about 40 to 7% of well measurements and show a decrease in groundwater level. So this is, it's a little bit hard to read. You can look at the 1 year change, the 2 years change, the 5 years change, the 10 and the 20-year change that are provided by the Department of Water Resources, but need to be really careful on understanding what you're looking for, because the 1 year change might show things that a trend that might be misleading, and we always need to go look at what the real trend in long terms too.
Great. Okay.
But I put a note and add that type of information on the next presentation.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Those are the only questions I had.
That was great. Thank you for having that on hand. It's interesting on that ground level, water level change on the 10-year, you really do see the recharge activities happening in Southern California there, where you see that real big increase. And that's, due to a lot of investments I know that have been continued to be made out there. So thank you. Really good questions, board member.
Thank you for the attention and for the questions.
Yeah,
if I could, so thank you as always for the hydrology updates. It's really informative and incredibly timely here, given the challenges that we could be facing. And I know that this is focused predominantly on the Bay Delta watershed, and when we think about all the water users in California, I mean, obviously there are tens of millions of folks and many millions of acres of agricultural land that rely on the Bay Delta for its water supply, and the Colorado as well. But I'm still here at the state board, and I still have a statewide concern and interest in our hydrologic conditions. And so I recall that last year there were actually most of the dry year challenges that we faced this past year were actually in the North Coast watershed. I mean, we were thinking about the Scott. I believe there were some curtailments there. We've heard from a number of stakeholders on other rivers, Napa, Russian River as well. And so, I just ask that, and maybe you pick a river at a time, or however you think it best, not to overwhelm you with your reporting updates, but I would like to get a sense for what's going on in those other watersheds as well at, whenever you're ready at this update or on a separate item. I know that the division has a number of drought preparation efforts underway currently, and I believe we'll be hearing about those in the coming months, but just an ongoing interest in the hydrology, the conditions that we're seeing in these other North Coast rivers, which can be quite different from what we see in the Bay Delta and the San Joaquin watersheds in Tulare. So I just want to flag that for you. It kind of goes along the lines of the groundwater conditions, and in terms of, we're curious in terms of what we're not seeing here with this report, and just wanting to have maybe a complete picture of California and what we're seeing in terms of water supply. So thank you.
Certainly.
Thank you, board member. Well, thank you so much. Really appreciate the great presentation, and fingers crossed for a few more storms here through the winter months. So
Let's hope for the better.
yes.
Thank you.
And we'll be prepared either way. So thank you. Yes. Okay, next we'll move on to informational item number 4, which are the results from the 2019 volumetric annual report of wastewater and recycled water in California. Excited about this item actually because this is actually our first report out from our yearly now volumetric reporting that we have instituted at the board. Prior, we didn't really have this comprehensive snapshot of the water recycling activities happening in the state. Prior, I think we had an assessment done. It was done in 2015. So just want to really commend the great work that I know has gone on to stand this up, and look forward to hearing this item here. Ms. Greenwood.
Excellent. Good morning.
Good morning.
Chair SWRCB and everybody at the board. My name is Rebecca Greenwood. I'm an engineering geologist with the Recycled Water and Desalination Unit in the Division of Water Quality, here today for item number 4. Next slide. Presenting with me today will be Laura McClellan, Senior Environmental Scientist with the Division of Water Quality. And for the item, we also have Claire Wagner and Shala Faranock with the Division of Water Quality, as well as Tim Reagan with Office of Chief Counsel. Today, we will be presenting the results from the implementation of the annual volumetric reporting requirements for the wastewater and recycled water facilities statewide. Next slide. So the most recent amendment to the recycled water policy was adopted by the board in December of 2018, and it took effect in April of 2019. This policy contained a numeric goal to increase the recycled water use to at least 2.5 million acre feet per year by the year 2030. Additionally, it included 2 narrative goals to reuse all dry weather direct discharges to oceans, enclosed bays, estuaries, and coastal lagoons to the extent feasible, and to maximize the recycled water use in areas where groundwater supplies are threatened. Next slide. To evaluate the recycled water use and determine whether the state could achieve these ambitious goals, the policy added requirements for the volumetric reporting of wastewater and recycled water. And in July of 2019, the State Water Board Executive Director issued an order to update the monitoring and reporting programs to implement these requirements to both wastewater treatment plants and recycled water producers. So collaborating with the regional board, staff mailed over 800 orders to facilities and identified that some of these facilities, through additional outreach, received this order erroneously. And there are currently 756 facilities subject to this order. The order requires the annual reporting of the volumetric data for influent, what's coming into the plant, production, what level is that water being treated to, and then effluent, where's that water going? And if applicable, recycled water use such as groundwater recharge or landscape irrigation is also reported. Next slide. So staff evaluated potential reporting systems and selected GeoTracker to house the reporting module to make tracking data consistent, electronic, and available to everyone. And once the reporting module was built, the team conducted beta testing with both regional board staff and external stakeholders to solicit input into the system and ensure the process was straightforward and streamlined. After incorporating this feedback, staff released the GeoTracker reporting module in March, and the reporting module functions as a fillable form and is user-friendly and easy to access. Due to COVID-19, the State Water Board Executive Director granted a 60-day extension on the reporting deadline for the 2019 calendar year report from April 30th to June 30th, 2020. And this extension provided agencies some flexibility and additional time in completing their reports. In the time since these data have been submitted, we have gone through some quality assurance checks to ensure that everything was the way it should be. And we have prepared all of this data for publishing on the California Open Data Portal. Next slide. So since the time that the initial order went out, staff has answered hundreds of calls and emails from permittees. We have also conducted outreach with permittees through emails, phone calls, listservs, hard copy mailers, and coordinated with Water Reuse California and the California Association of Sanitation Agencies to provide information about the requirements and resources to their members. To assist in completing this report, since it is the first year, additional resources, including a training webinar, help guide, and a frequently asked questions fact sheet are all available on the Recycled Water Policy Volumetric Reporting webpage. And we anticipate that these resources will continue to streamline the reporting moving forward. Next slide. So for the first annual report, we have a 93% compliance rate, which translates to about only 46 facilities that have not yet reported. And all of the data that I'm going to be showing you today is going to be based off of the date of December 21st, 2020. We greatly appreciate all the efforts of the facilities that have completed this first report, especially considering the significant and persistent challenges over this past year. Next slide.
Here, just to add my incredible thanks to all of, all the wastewater facilities and water recyclers out there. I mean, 93% report rate is just really incredible. Just thank you.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so before I get into the data, I'd like to highlight some key differences to the annual reporting requirement and the prior survey efforts that Chair Esquivel had talked about a little bit before this item. And so in 2009, the Division of Financial Assistance conducted a voluntary survey to capture how much reuse was occurring in California. And this effort was repeated in 2015 with the assistance of the Department of Water Resources. In contrast, this volumetric annual report moving forward are going to be required, not voluntary, and they capture additional data on influent and effluent volumes. The previous survey also captured a broader definition of recycled water than the annual report. And this means that by comparing prior survey year data and this year's annual report data, we're going to be comparing apples and oranges. So for example, previous surveys considered discharge to a wetland or a natural system to be a recycled water use, whereas the current annual report does not. The current annual report considers recycled water to be a wastewater that is treated and used in compliance with California Code Regulation Title 22, and this is consistent with the recycled water policy. Finally, prior surveys were fairly labor intensive, and both permittees and staff had a lot of effort going through these, and so they were conducted on a much less frequent basis. Moving forward, the volumetric annual report looks to improve these data needed to start answering these questions about wastewater and recycled water on an annual basis. And so with that, I'm going to dive into the results, but please bear in mind that, again, this is not going to be an apples to apples comparison with prior years. But moving forward, we will have the ability to compare this data that we have now because we have a consistent electronic annual reporting requirement. Next slide. So here are the three big picture takeaways to take away from the first volumetric annual report. In 2019, 3.7 million acre feet of total influent volume entered wastewater treatment plants. This influent volume is raw, untreated wastewater, and it does not include influent to facilities that do not treat raw wastewater, such as some recycled water producers that further treat a primary or secondary effluent. On the left-hand side of the slide, you can see that there's 2.7 million acre feet of treated wastewater effluent that was discharged. And this number represents a range of treatment levels, but it is the potential source for future recycled water. And I'll talk about that and some complexities with that in increasing this recycled water in some subsequent slides. And the final category to your right is recycled water use, where we show that there is 686,000 acre feet of recycled water was used consistent with Title 22 regulations. So now you may be thinking, I don't know how to do math. And hold on, 2.7 million acre feet and 686,000 don't add up to 3.3 million. That's different than the 3.7 million. So what's going on? Why is there a difference between this input and output number? Well, the difference of about 300,000 acre feet may be accounted for with in-plant use, pond storage, water loss in biosolids, or potentially loss of water in the process of treating it. So while previous surveys focused on the amount of reuse in California, we now have a much bigger picture of what's going on with wastewater treatment plants and being able to have both input and output numbers. This will enable us to evaluate progress towards the state's recycled water goals, but also evaluate the impacts of conservation, reduced flows into wastewater treatment plants, and the true availability of wastewater in California. Next slide. So now I'm going to start to break down some of these big picture numbers. Facilities are required to classify themselves in this report based on if they are producing recycled water in compliance with Title 22. So of the 710 facilities that have reported, 428 facilities shown in a greenish color are classified as wastewater treatment plants. These facilities receive that raw influent wastewater, treat it to a standard, and then discharge it as an effluent. The next classification, which is shown in a bluish purple, is the wastewater treatment plants that produce recycled water in compliance with Title 22. And there are 265 facilities that classify themselves this way. And finally, the last number is 17 facilities shown in the yellow color, which are considered recycled water producers only. These facilities do not receive raw influent wastewater, but receive treated wastewater from an upstream wastewater treatment plant or another source and treat it further to produce a recycled water in compliance with Title 22 for an approved use. Next slide. Okay, so as an additional level of granularity, facilities also report the level of treatment that this water is processed to. And this graph shows the distribution of the treatment levels across all of those facilities that I showed you on the previous slide. Big takeaways from this is that the largest category of wastewater is treated to a secondary standard, and the largest treatment category for recycled water is a disinfected tertiary. This is important in evaluating future capabilities of plants to see if upgrading a plant to begin producing recycled water is really feasible. For example, if a facility is already treating to a secondary standard, maybe they can do some upgrades to their plant to produce a recycled water. But if they do that, what's the feasibility and who would actually take that water once it's produced? And we'll get a little bit into that in a couple slides later. Next slide. So now they've all gone through this, they've treated their water, and they're going to tell us where it goes. So if an effluent is not recycled in compliance with Title 22, then that effluent's discharged. And that's what this graph breaks down. So the largest volume of effluent is being discharged to ocean waters, enclosed bays, estuaries, and coastal lagoons for nearly 1.8 million acre feet per year. And the second largest category in this graph is discharged to inland surface waters at around 500,000 acre feet per year. We also collect an additional level of granularity on that question, and we're able to identify that 242,000 acre feet of that was discharged to an inland surface water with a minimum in-stream flow requirement. And as I mentioned earlier, although natural systems is not a recycled water category in the annual report, we do still capture this data through this category and note that it is a beneficial use of water. So you can see that that's that 43,000 acre feet per year on that graph. So this data is going to be really informative in water supply planning and understanding the potential for future recycled water opportunities. And as California looks to increase reuse in water scarce regions, more proposed recycled water projects will likely need an approved wastewater change petition from the Division of Water Rights before proceeding. And there may be an increased proportion of California's inland surface waters that require a minimum in-stream flow requirement. Next slide. So, given some considerations and knowing that the majority of California's effluent is discharged to the ocean, how much of that wastewater can we feasibly recycle and where would it go? And what are the factors that affect that feasibility? So the State Water Board is currently funding a research project through the Water Research Foundation to identify the amount of wastewater that is available and feasible to recycle in California. The project will take into account factors that affect feasibility, such as seasonal supply and demand, treatment levels, proximity to potential reuse areas, and the availability of funding. And this will help us evaluate the goals from the policy on how to increase the reuse of effluent discharge to ocean waters, as well as increasing reuse in areas where groundwater supplies are threatened. This project will determine the volume of wastewater available for reuse and identify potential applications and sites to characterize the relative weight of the different factors affecting reuse potential. The final report for this project will be due in July of 2022. Next slide.
Ms. Greenwood, if I could ask a question on that previous slide real quick. I'm really excited to see the results of this really important study when it's completed. I wish it would be available sooner rather than later, but it is what it is. I was just wondering, because it is so complicated to implement, to plan, design, implement, fund a recycled water project. There's a lot that goes into it, and many of these projects take, several years to sometimes decades to make, become a reality. Just wondering, have we thought about asking the POTWs what their projections are for recycled water use in the future? We're asking what their historical use was. This is obviously would be more of a forward-looking snapshot, but just wondering if that's been considered or if that's something within our authority to do, or any thoughts on that?
Well, I think at this time, we haven't asked that question, not specifically from the Division of Water Quality. I do know that Division of Financial Assistance tracks the projects that are applying for funding to see how much increase they will have of recycled water there. Potentially, I think water reuse, California has some of these numbers, but I would have to get back to you with that after this presentation.
And Chair Escobar, I'd like to give a few thoughts on that.
Oh yes, of course. Mr. Bishop.
It's a vexing question. At what level do we consider what their planning is? Is it when they are thinking about it, which may or may not come in when they've got a approval from their voting board to start pursuit, when they've developed an application for funding or bond sales? So I think that it would make sense for us to think about what we're asking for so that we can compare the different estimates between them in a more uniform way. It's hard, when we put out the request for proposals, when we $800 million for recycled water, we got projects from all ends of the scale. People that were pretty close to being done with construction to people that saw this and decided it would be a good idea to try it. And so I think we should put some thought into it and work with water reuse and with the associations on how best to identify at what stage they're in and what stage we want to consider that the project is more likely than not to move forward.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And for me, it's, I'm thinking here, we have a pretty ambitious goal. I think we can all acknowledge that the 2.5 million acre feet by 2030 it's a reach, for us in the statewide. And I think this study will help kind of hone in on what's feasible. But I think we also want to have a good sense for what's realistic and what we're actually going to be seeing within the next decade and beyond. I know some of the larger projects are going to take even longer than 10 years to really see come to fruition. So just give some thought to this and what makes the most sense. Maybe it's water reuse, maybe they have the data or they can help inform that. I'm not looking to create a whole new process here, really just trying to get us a better understanding of where we are, where we're going, and how do we best support and incentivize these types of really important projects to move forward.
And I do know that there's a number of large projects that are kind of waiting for the direct portable reuse regs to evaluate the effect, how feasible it will be for them to go there.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, board member. Really appreciate that exchange, and would just add on. I think the two places where we can further discuss that is perhaps in the report, that is looking at feasibility, and part of that I'm hearing is what is the financial feasibility and otherwise, and then also just as an ongoing basis with the Division of Financial Assistance, which sounding like as a proxy we have at least the applications that are coming in, better understanding what those are, teasing them out, getting some and unearthing it. I think would probably even benefit the report ultimately. So good comments and question. Thank you.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, and I have a couple of facts about the Division of Financial Assistance projects that are going to be coming up in the future in a couple of slides forward, I think. So we can talk a little bit more about that when we get there. But any adjustments to the reports and future iterations are definitely welcomed, and as much data as we can get out of this that's useful and interesting is very important. Okay, so next slide. All right. So moving on to the 686,000 acre feet of water that was recycled in 2019. Recycled water that's used in compliance with Title 22 is broken down by this graph by category of use. What I want to highlight here is the largest portion of the pie chart on the left that is highlighted in a yellow-green color is potable reuse, which John mentioned a little bit earlier, but this includes seawater intrusion barrier and groundwater recharge. Next slide. So how is the state doing compared to previous service years? So bearing in mind that we're not making that true apples to apples comparison, from 2015 to 2019, there's a 1.8% decrease in recycled water use. And besides the exclusion from natural systems as a recycled water use category, the 2019 annual report also does not consider discharge of wastewater to spray fields to be recycled water use. And this is because although a crop may be harvested, the primary purpose of this discharge is disposal of treated wastewater, and there is not a reuse taking place in compliance with Title 22. And so as we can see from this graph, there is a decrease in recycled water use in the Central Valley in the yellow color. And this may be due in part to the decrease in recycled water use for agriculture irrigation overall, which I'll talk a little bit more about in the following slides. But of the 46 missing reports that we have, 34 of them are from the Central Valley. But we are not positive that those additional numbers would make a large impact in the recycled water volume here. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and try to break down some of the 2019 numbers a little bit further. So next slide. So if we look in at a snapshot of each region, you can see that there's a varying amount of recycled water used by each category. In Region 4 and Region 8, they have the highest potable uses, and they also use a large portion of non-potable water. On the other side of that, Region 5 has the highest agricultural reuse of all of the regions. So now let's take a look at the reuse category comparisons side by side. Next slide. So the previous slide provides a comparison of reuse. I'm sorry, this slide provides a comparison of reuse by categories from the 2009-2015 surveys and the 2019 annual report. And while not all categories can be compared directly, this grouping provides the closest comparison. So as you can see, many of the reuse categories stayed around the same, hovering about a similar number over these timeframes. For example, golf course irrigation and landscape irrigation are about the same, but showing a slight decrease from 2015. These slight decreases in these categories may be a result of successful conservation efforts coming out of the last drought, but we're not sure. And the biggest difference that you can see in this graph is in agriculture irrigation. So in 2009, it was a little under 250,000 acre feet. It dropped in 2015, and now it has fallen even further, sitting just below 150,000 acre feet. In consulting,
I'm sorry to interrupt, Ms. Greenwood. I think there again want to clarify for folks that what we're seeing as probably a likely source of that great reduction is again this classification of in previous years where wastewater that was disposed of through spray onto fields was categorized as recycled water, and now conforming to Title 22 standards, then that's not actually a recycled water use. It's a disposal onto a field. So just to kind of clarify there for folks still further, because I think, at least for me, it was sort of a it stood out. And I know that we have great examples of projects like Turlock and Ceres who are recycling water and sending it for agricultural use, and a really innovative work throughout the state that we continue to want to see, and hopefully doesn't, again, this kind of can help better explain what we see here as a drop in what is otherwise, I know, a priority for many of us in the state. So.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's really great that you mentioned that again. And I want to note that while we kind of started to draw a hard line for that recycled water to be that Title 22 compliance, we do capture those additional categories such as discharges to lands, which could be those spray field irrigations and that discharge to natural wetlands. So we still do have those numbers. It's just where we're drawing the line in the sand for what's considered a recycled water use. So looking at these numbers, we talked to a couple different people in other programs, other staff, and staff that were previously involved in the 2009-2015 surveys, and tried to think of a few potential reasons as to why this decrease is so large. And like we said before, there may be an overall trend in more water efficient crops and irrigation practices since the last drought. For example, there's been significant investment in programs such as CDFA's State Water Efficiency Enhancement Program, which provides financial assistance in the form of grants to implement irrigation systems that reduce greenhouse gases and save water. So again, just to highlight in this graph, groundwater recharge is increasing. And as we mentioned before, potable reuse in general is increasing compared to previous years. And as projects funded through Prop 1 Water Recycling Funding Program begin to come online, we think we'll be able to see this number increase. So next slide. So as Sean mentioned, I gave a whole bunch of numbers, and everybody will be thinking about what about our goals. So the goal, it's pretty ambitious, and we're not quite on track to meet that goal, but we have really taken a major step forward in being more informed, and we'll continue to have consistent data. And this data set was going to be used to reevaluate and continue to explore options for water recycling increases. We're going to continue to work with the recycled water community and develop new goals informed by these data and be able to track this great resource for California. So next slide. And here it's also worth mentioning that there's a significant recent investment in recycled water projects through the State Water Board's Water Recycling Funding Program. From 2015 through 2019, the State Water Board funded 61 projects representing an additional 190,000 acre feet per year. About 75% of these projects are still in the construction phase, but we do anticipate a significant increase in recycled water use for groundwater recharge, landscape irrigation, and agriculture irrigation as a result of the funding from Prop 1, Prop 13, Prop 68, and the Clean Water State Revolving Fund. Next slide. So in wrapping up the first year of reporting, this is what we're going to be doing in the next upcoming months. We're going to publish the 2019 data set on the Open Data Portal later today, and we will continue to collaborate with regional boards to work with facilities that have not yet reported the 2019 data. And then once all of that has been completed, we're going to notify the Office of Enforcement of the remaining facilities that still need to report to achieve compliance as needed. The reporting module in GeoTracker is going to be open this month, so any early bird reporters will be able to log in and get the reports entered as soon as they want. In March, we're going to go ahead and begin with outreach to facilities to log on to GeoTracker and submit the data for 2020. And this outreach is going to be significantly more straightforward, much to my liking, since the 2019 effort was a lot of facilities to get a hold of. So now everybody has GeoTracker accounts. We have updated contact information and can start using email reminders to get everybody's awareness for this report and get them on the annual reporting train. So the annual report for 2020 is going to be due by April 30th, 2021. Next slide. So again, just to kind of wrap it all up, with the annual report, we really did take a huge step forward in making this data consistent, streamlined, and centralized. And we focused on promoting open data for the water boards. And we're going to continue to evaluate trends in water use and evaluate the impacts from conservation efforts. Tracking these trends we're going to be able to look at some declines in recycled water use, but additionally potential increases in others. especially with the more potable reuse projects coming online with the development of the regulations for the direct potable reuse. We're going to continue to evaluate what's coming into these plants and where all of our effluent is going so that we can continue to inform other water board programs, including water rights petitions and the water recycling funding program. All of these data are going to inform water supply planning efforts. And it's not just going to affect us locally, but it's going to affect us on a national scale. We're going to be able to look at updates to the California Water Plan, track goals in the water resilience portfolio, and support the implementation of the US EPA's National Water Reuse Action Plan. And finally, these data are going to allow us to track progress towards goals in the recycled water policy and determine whether revisions to this goal may be appropriate for the next recycled water policy amendment. And this volumetric reporting demonstrates the state board's commitment to using high quality data to inform and support the long-term stewardship of California's water resources. So thank you for your time today, and we'll be happy to answer any questions. And if you want to hit the next slide, we have some resources if you want to access some of this data or ask any questions to our recycled water help desk.
Thank you so much, Ms. Greenwood. Just fantastic presentation and work on this project. To your, hopefully, yes, that I can imagine this year will be a little more easier, a little less intensive, but that intense work that was applied to this just really shows. One, with the response rate, the thoughtfulness and thoroughness of just the entire project. And so it does, as you said, put us on really firm footing for our direct potable reuse regs to come onto the scene, for us to understand the impact of those regs as we see hopefully increases, as we did with the advancement of indirect potable reuse regulations and the increasing groundwater recharge with recycled water. Similarly with direct potable here, hopefully see a real shift and change, and we're well primed to be able to see it and to accommodate for it and to inform our other programs, also to your point, including the Division of Financial Assistance, which, very proud of the incredible amount of dollars and investment that have been put into water recycling through DFA and but also in the state generally. I think sometimes it's easy to forget that we've invested well over $5 billion in the last 5 years in the state's infrastructure in drinking water and wastewater and water recycling, the marrying thereof. And so just thank you for the really great work, and want to acknowledge the great partners, Jennifer West at Water Reuse, Sean Bothwell at California Coastkeeper Alliance, and I think they're here on our speaker list, so we'll hear a bit from them as well. But just look forward to this continued data point and the really incredible work. We were just talking about how dry conditions are, and we know water recycling to be that drought proof or drought resilient, we'll say, supply certainly, and part of adapting to climate change. So just thank you, and no further question other than just really good accolade to you. Board members, thoughts and questions? And we do have a few folks here to speak to, so we can go to those speaker cards here soon as well. Hearing none, we can move on to comment then. I think first up we have here is Sean Bothwell from the California Coastkeeper Alliance. Good morning.
Good afternoon, Chair Esquivel, board members. It's great to see you today. My name is Sean Bothwell. I'm here today on behalf of California Coastkeeper Alliance. I want to start by somewhat echoing what the chair said about all the great work that staff did to collect this data, the presentation. They were kind enough to give me some time back in November to brief me on this, and it was incredibly insightful. And I've actually been looking forward to this hearing for ever since then, just because it was so powerful to finally get that data. Another thing Esquivel said at the beginning was, I didn't see this as just a normal informational item about random reporting. This is a really big moment because we never had this data before. We never knew the potential of what we could recycle, what's coming into a facility, what's going out, what we are recycling. And to be honest, it's hard to believe that we didn't have that information. I remember a couple of years ago, water reuse and cost of like we just don't know. And I almost didn't believe them because I couldn't believe we didn't have this data out there. And so to finally have it is great. And I realize that there's some apples to oranges comparisons, and it's only going to get better over time. It's only going to get more streamlined, and your staff's going to do a great job of making sure that we have a clear picture, especially as direct potable reuse comes online. I have three major takeaways I wanted to share with the board. The first is just what I said, that we now have this data to properly set the goals that we have. Some of you might remember when we were doing the recycled water policy, my big thing about having the ocean wastewater discharge was that was an actual thing we knew how much, well, we knew that there was water being wasted out to the ocean. The current goals that we have for water cycling, I think they need to be retailored to what the data actually shows. We shouldn't be asking folks to recycle if there's not the potential out there to recycle it. We also shouldn't be cutting ourselves short if there's more potential out there. And so one recommendation I would have is for staff, once this other report comes out in 2022, once we have a little more data from all the facilities and it's apples to apples, for staff to go back and reevaluate those state goals in the recycled water policy and accurately tailor them to the data that we have and the potential that we have. The second recommendation I have really comes from the number, though it was about 1.79 million acre feet of water wasted annually to the ocean. For me, that was a big number that I would, we've been really curious to see what is out there, because we do find that to be wasteful. And I would just ask, as a starting place, that the water board go and brief the Ocean Protection Council on this data at a public hearing. For those of you that don't know, Ocean Strategic Plan was adopted last year with the goal 1.2.3. And that goal is to establish interim goals statewide to significantly reduce nutrient loading or the phasing out of coastal wastewater discharge to the ocean. And then the goal goes on, similar to the goal that you have in your recycled water policy, to achieve 80 to 90% coastal wastewater recycling that can be put to beneficial use by 2040. So, I think it would be great if both agencies worked collaboratively together. You both have very similar goals in the recycled water policy and the strategic plan, looking not just at a possibility for more water supply, but also how we can improve water quality along the coast, particularly the nutrient loading and the impacts it has on ocean acidification. Second major takeaway I have is, and I understand that's apples to oranges, but it looks like over the last decade, the water recycling has been fairly stagnant. I like that we're moving to more potable reuse, but the numbers show that we haven't really increased. And I completely get to Member McGuire's point that these projects take a long time to come online. We're waiting for the DPR regs. I know that water reuse is working. Water recycling agencies are working to get this stuff done. But we have been stagnant over the years, and now that we have the data, it would be great for the state board to consider, what type of carrots or sticks, policy sticks, are there to get us to move to meet our goals. For example, we talked about the Office of Finance, but what type of financial incentives can we provide for folks that are going to take achieving these goals seriously? The ocean discharge one, for example, is something that I think can be better incentivized through strategic planning, so folks are preparing to recycle as much as they can. A more stick policy-like approach, just as an example, could be the state could not be approving ocean desal facilities when in the same region we're still wastefully discharging millions of acre feet of water to the ocean every year. But I think more importantly, the water board needs to take this opportunity to truly advance integrated water management by directing the regional boards to consider water supply issues when issuing their MPDS permits. Regional boards are historically only looking at water quality, but if we're going to really get at integrated water management, they need to be considering these water supply investments as well. And the water boards have the legal foundation instrument to do that with the waste and unreasonable use analysis. There's also the court order that requires analysis to be conducted. So I would urge the water boards to consider and use the waste and unreasonable use doctrine as a way to advance integrated water management and really consider water supplies holistically when they're doing their NPDES permitting. The third takeaway was somewhat of what I thought was a loophole that I thought when we were when I was getting briefed. When I was getting briefed, there was a category in the presentation called application to land. It was about 2,088,000 acre feet of water that was being discharged as disposal without the permitting under Title 22 of the general order. And so I asked about it, and my understanding was these were old facilities that got permitted or were allowed to do this back in the 80s before we had the general order for irrigated land use and application. And it seems like the new general order for water recycling didn't sweep those folks in. And so I would urge staff and the water board to consider how we can close that loophole and bring those folks that are discharging wastewater to land under the water recycling general order so that they're in compliance with Title 22, just like all the other folks that are recycling water and disposing it for irrigation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bothwell, for the really great comments. And I appreciate the thoughts and recommendations on how to better use the regional boards. I'll certainly continue to provide thought and circle back with staff around some of that. So thank you.
I was just wondering if staff have clarifications on that last point. If not right now, that's fine. Just thought I'd ask.
Sure, I can give you general clarification. There, the definition that we've adopted for recycle is Title 22 compliant. The facilities that are disposing by land application don't meet that that category because they don't have the treatment level to be Title 22 compliant. So they are discharging as a to land as a means of disposal, not as a means of recycling water. I know it gets fuzzy because, you know, as it travels through the soil and has soil treatment, eventually gets the groundwater. You could call that groundwater recharge, but that's not what we consider groundwater recharge because it is really waste disposal. The same with spray irrigation isn't a reuse because your purpose is to dispose of that waste. There may be a secondary benefit to the groundwater if it's meeting its standards. If it's not meeting its standards, then or if its standards are not severe enough, then it's actually impacting the groundwater, not helping it. So we can look more closely at the level of treatment in those to see if some of them should be changed in classification. But generally, they're a disposal of waste and not a recycle, and that's why they're not counted that way.
Thanks. And yeah, I think I'm interested in learning more about that. It seems like there's a lot to unpack.
Yeah, thank you, board member. Any other thoughts or questions for Mr. Bothwell from fellow board colleagues? Great. Thank you, Mr. Bothwell. Again, really appreciate the great collaboration on this work. And to your point, we'll definitely reach out to Deputy Secretary Mark Gold and talk about making sure that we cross-pollinate, if you will, with the Ocean Protection Council on this. Very important to do so, particularly, you know, given the 1.7 million acre feet we see being discharged into our oceans there. So thank you. Next, I'd like to call up Daniel Cooper from Sycamore Law.
Good morning, members of the board. I'm Daniel Cooper, and today I'm here on behalf of LA Waterkeeper. This volumetric production report caught my eye because I am one of the attorneys on LA Waterkeeper's challenge to the NPDES permit for Hyperion, Glendale, Tillman, and Burbank wastewater treatment facilities in Southern California, which are collectively responsible for somewhere in the range of 500 million gallons per day of freshwater discharge to Santa Monica Bay, either directly or via the LA River. So this is a major contributor to this 1.7 number, that 1.8 million acre feet per year number we're hearing about just being discharged to the ocean. And in Southern California, you know, with the drought and everything we saw in the volumetric report previously, we all know that's a big concern to be discharging that much fresh water into the ocean merely to carry waste when recycling is a pretty viable option down there. And just to remind you all that the Superior Court did order the state board to conduct a waste and unreasonable review of those discharges and to decide whether using the water in that manner was reasonable given the overall context. And the state board has the tools in place to conduct a waste and unreasonable use review. It's typically done in a water rights permit issuance context. There's precedential orders from you all setting out the factors to be considered. So there's a process set out and you know, you guys have implemented it a number of times. That process will answer some of the questions that were asked previously during the presentation about recycled water, like what is your authority to request information about the potential for recycled use at POTWs? Well, not only do you have the authority, you have a duty to investigate that feasibility. That's part of the waste and reasonable use analysis you should be conducting when NPDES permits are reissued to wastewater treatment plants. And so again, I would urge you all to consider whether to proceed with your appeal of that Superior Court decision, which is effectively defending, at least it's LA Waterkeeper's view, is defending your right not to conduct that analysis and not to work effectively with the regional board in order to do that analysis at POTWs, but instead to work with us and with the court in developing a process to conduct a waste and a reasonable use analysis as NPDES permits are reissued, to allow the information being collected as part of this overall report to be used to evaluate the feasibility for recycling, the potential going forward, whether water used merely for discharging waste into the ocean is reasonable, and then to implement binding requirements as part of the NPDES permit rather than voluntary goals, overall statewide targets, and so on. These sort of binding requirements are how we get to the 2.5 number that you're shooting for. I think it's clear from the report that we've stagnated currently, that the voluntary program, at least for now, LA Waterkeeper's view is it's not making significant progress, and that how we get there is through binding commitments. And I would just give the example of Hyperion. The city of Los Angeles has committed to very significant recycling goals for Hyperion, but that can change with an election. All it takes is for a new administration to come in and decide they don't want to spend that money, and that's all gone. And that's not, given the timeline to actually achieve recycling, which is, 7-10 years, something in that range, we need to have binding commitments in an enforceable permit issued by the regional and/or state boards, rather than just voluntary promises from an administration that changes with every election cycle. So those are my comments. And again, I'd urge us to work together rather than continuing to litigate on the question of waste and unreasonable use. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cooper. I appreciate your very good comments today. Next, we have Dennis Evans, who indicated speak only if needed. Mr. Evans, do you feel so compelled to speak?
Yes, I do.
Great. Glad you can join us this morning. Good morning.
Good morning. Is it available to do a screen share as well?
I don't believe we have.
If not, that's fine.
Yeah, I apologize. If you can get it over to our clerk of the board at commentletters@waterboards.ca.gov, she may be able to pull it up here.
I'll try that probably in a minute, but I'm gonna roll with this.
Okay.
And I will send you guys the information.
Okay. That works as well. Thank you.
As floodwater becomes an important part of California's water portfolio, water resource management strategies are going to be important now and in the future to significantly improve water resource sustainability and climate resiliency. Now, the white paper proposes that the state government has an interest in healthy aquifers, and that aquifers should be considered as green infrastructure. And really, that's one of the questions I wanted to answer today. But not only should aquifers an aquifer recharge be considered as green infrastructure, but it should be managed as an engineered process. Now, by integrating green infrastructure as an engineered process into urban settings with MAR only makes sense. And one of the most flexible types of tools within the MAR toolbox, of course, is the constructed wetland. They facilitate water reuse and recycling. And if we're looking at an estimate of 1.85 to 2.5 million acre feet of water supply that could be realized annually through recycling by the year 2020, really of this total, an estimated 0.9 to 1.4 million acre feet of recycled water could be realized of municipal wastewater that could be discharged into the oceans, or that's typically discharged into the rivers, oceans, and saline bays. And with the, because of the flexibility we have with constructed wetlands, its engineered discharge will be able to produce an annual production of about 500 megawatts of power. This power plant can save more than 210 tons of CO2 emissions per year. And also, it offers an opportunity for engineers to design habitat for endangered species like delta smelt and juvenile salmon. In a figure 18 of one of the case studies I have, they use a runoff river system, but it's easy to see how this will be more of a runoff wetland system, because I see it as more of an engineered process, and I look at it as more as an operator, and it ties in perfectly with the uses for recycled water for irrigation, which include food crops, parks and playgrounds, schoolyards, residential landscaping, unrestricted access golf courses, and any other irrigation that is not used to not specified in Title 1722 are not prohibited by other sections of the Code of California regulations. And my ultimate goal is to say that this all ties in perfectly with the conversation today. Not to say that to see AgMAR or MAR itself as not just a strategy, but an engineered process, to recognize it as an engineered process and to manage it as an engineered process. Now, again, I look at this more as from an operator's point of view. So I would like to continue this conversation. Again, I'd like to share the information I have with you, especially with the Archimedean screw turbine, because right now, I think there's maybe 2 in the United States. The technology is the newest old technology that we just seem to be overlooking. And this technology could be used strategically to help to enhance existing infrastructure, as well as for disadvantaged communities. Guys, I want to challenge the thinking here. I want to really push forward to moving towards a different way to see aquifer recharge, and a different way towards seeing all the tools we have within our MAR toolbox and utilizing them to the best effects that we can get. I'm hoping, I've been sharing with a lot of people with my city council here in Merced, and I'm also reaching out to you because I feel like this issue is not just feasible, it's already proven itself. We just got to put it into the game. So I look, if you guys have any questions or comments, again, I'd like to continue the conversation and get the information over to you as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Evans. I completely agree with you that we need to be really systems thinking here, ultimately,
yes,
and connecting the drops through our watersheds and seeing both, the built infrastructure that we all manage and the natural infrastructure that it's all based off of as a continuum. And
yes.
Hopeful that these data points, when it comes to the amount of influent coming into wastewater facilities, the potential for its recycling and its nexus with groundwater recharge and all the activities of beneficial use that stem from it, can continue to be better connected. So I appreciate your comments today and working and continue to try to connect those dots in your local community and your work. So any information you want to share with us, you can send to comment letters at waterboards.ca.gov. It's on the agenda today as an email address to reach out to. Send the materials there. It'll go to Janine Townsend, the clerk of our board, and she can distribute it to us as board members. So thank you so much, Mr. Evans. Really do appreciate your contributions this day.
You're welcome. And again, let's really push this forward. I mean, I'm not just, this is not a fantasy type of thing. It could really be, it's not a silver bullet, of course, but it can be a game changer. to help us move towards the goal of water sustainability. And I'll get that information to you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Mr. Evans.
You're welcome.
And I would just add to Mr. Evans, if you haven't already, probably connecting with the Central Valley Regional Board as well.
Thank you. Next, we have up Jennifer West from Water Reuse California. And then finishing off here with Jared Voskel from the California Association of Sanitation Agencies. Good morning, Ms. West.
Good morning. Thank you so much. This is kind of an exciting presentation. So I want to start first by thanking Rebecca and everybody at the Division of Water Quality. We worked with them from the very beginning on the development of this survey, and we were supportive of the Water Board conducting this survey and getting this information. Again, I agree with Sean that after we have another year of this information and we have the WRF study complete, we should be reevaluating in the next recycled water policy what's feasible, what's reasonable. But I just want to shout out to my membership and CASA's. We have 93% response, and that is a great deal to staff and everybody at Division of Water Quality was able to answer, as they said, hundreds of questions, and this was not easy, so thank you. I want to make just a few overarching statements based on the conversation today. We do have major potable reuse projects, as most of you on the board know, coming online in Southern California. These are extremely complex projects that are planned in San Diego, in Los Angeles, where we expect these numbers to go up dramatically within the next 10 years. Unfortunately, these projects are very involved, and some are direct potable reuse and depend on DDW completing the DPR regulations. And we are excited that I know they're going to be starting the expert panel process at DDW in 2021. So that is a huge milestone for recycled water, and I didn't want this hearing to pass without thanking DDW for their efforts, and also Division of Financial Assistance. These projects are expensive, complex, and they take that regulatory component. So I will expect these numbers to go up. And as I said, I do think we should, though, in addition, expect to reevaluate the goals with that WRF study. I would like to see, I have a couple suggestions for improvements in the next survey, and I'd like to continue to work with the staff on this if possible. One of them is I'd like to have an optional comment section to allow agencies to explain if their recycled water use is going to significantly change from the previous year or is planned to change in the past. So we'll have a better idea on if there's a big swing, if there's been some repurposing of what has happened. I was going to say, but I was very pleased to see that the staff included that a specific category for reporting in-stream flows where recycled water is required to be discharged. And I want to point out that number because so the total we have from this report is 686,000 acre feet. The in-stream flow requirement requiring recycled water is 242,000 acre feet. So I would just hope that while we are messaging out these numbers, sure, we'd like these numbers to be bigger, but that one is not optional, and that is a huge benefit that recycled water plays while not technically Title 22.
Thank you for flagging that, and it is a really good point amongst that. I know that it's been a tension in the LA region, and particularly obviously our effluent dominated streams down south, but it continues to be a need throughout the state. So.
Yeah. So, I mean, I just think it's just accurate in transparency what's happening with recycled water and unnecessarily kind of discounting its use if we do not co-report those numbers, so to speak. So then getting back to this issue about agri-use, I think we should consider this more closely in terms of potentially if the recycled water, even if it, I think if what we're seeing is obviously we've discussed the dramatic decrease in recycled water for agriculture. So this is a great concern to us. We really want to dig into the numbers. We want to work with staff, and now we know they're online. So I want to take the numbers from 2015 and look at the differences from 2019 and really try to understand what has happened here. Is this a true trend? Are there concerns with water quality from farmers or growers? Are there higher TDS levels that are creating problems with drip irrigation? Or is this certainly the spray field issue? Now, I would say that, sorry, I have a delivery at the door, which is distracting. I would say that I would submit that it would be more, if recycled water is being applied on a field used for agricultural purposes using agronomic methods, yes, they might not have filed an engineering report, but I do not think I think again, that should be counted as ag reuse. Those crops, whether alfalfa or some other low level crop, would need to be watered with another source. So I think we need more specifics, and this decrease is so significant that I think it warrants that. We are all supportive of ag reuse. Obviously, potable reuse is a huge focus for us, but ag reuse is really important for the state. It's important for that narrative goal for maximizing the recycled water in the groundwater. So we want to commit to working with, we'll do it. We've already reached out to the farm community and about this decrease because we got a briefing, and they're willing to work with us too. So we're excited to try to find out that. And I would urge that while they might not have filed an engineering report and be technically under Title 22, if there's a way to look at this more constructively, I would think that would be good for everybody. So I'm going to do that. And then finally, water reuse. Again, we're super committed to promoting ag reuse in California, and these studies that the Water Board and WRF has helped us with in the past. We've just opened a website today or in the last couple days, specifically on ag reuse for our members, and hoping that it can be a resource for the ag community. So we are very excited. At conclusion, we are very excited about the potential for increasing reuse in the state. We think that there are, I know that Mr. McGuire asked early on, what are the potentials? And then there was a discussion about where should we say, at what point should we say this is a planned project? And I think that that's a healthy discussion to have. But I think we have projects that are well underway that all of you have been briefed on, where we know it's coming. And I believe we will see those numbers increase, particularly in the potable reuse category. So thank you again. And I just again, shout out to Division of Water Quality for everybody's work there. You've done a great job. And that's it.
Thank you so much, Ms. West, for your very constructive feedback here. I agree with you that we have a lot of potential here, and we need to really drill down a little deeper into the ag number. I know Board Member Firestone also flagged wanting to understand, what order are they under? If it's simply an engineering report that's needed to bring them under Title 22, and for us to then just accurately then classify the activities that are going on, we can figure out how we parse it out, so we just have an accurate reflection and understanding of the issue there. Ms. Faranak, do you maybe want to add in a bit there?
Yes, thank you, Chair, for giving me a few minutes. So first of all, I wanted to thank Board Member Dodak and our previous board member, Francis Spivey-Weber, who have really been the driving force pushing staff to generate this information. I wanted to comment on a few things that may be helpful for staff as they go forward, and also for the board. And thanks staff for doing such a great job on delivering on that. As with respect to projections, we could potentially, as Jennifer West mentioned, we could look into whether we could add an optional field to the survey to capture that to the extent it doesn't create confusion and it's still kind of a streamlined data system, because that was our goal. With respect to ag use, I think very good points have been made. That has been one of the areas we've been looking at. We had sponsored a study to look at the incentives and impediments for use of recycled water in ag field. But realistically, at some point in time, if we wanted to get a good understanding of the ag use, you'd be looking at the total water use and comparing that to see what % of that is recycled water. Because holistically, the way we look at this, the goal of recycled water is to see how much of the water that would be used as groundwater or surface water can be replaced by recycled water. So if you look at that ultimate goal, some of these differences may not be crucial. And the last thing I wanted to mention with respect to the WDR facilities and facilities that discharge treated water, one of the things we need to recognize that there are facilities, many facilities in the inland area that both have a waste discharge permit as well as recycled water permit. So part of the years that they are able and they have customers, they recycle water, and then there are portions of the year that they're not recycling that water because there's no customers. And in those cases, they be discharging. And in future, we could be looking at, are they discharging in the fields that otherwise would have been irrigated with water, or are they discharging in the fields that normally do not need irrigation? So those are certainly some of the complications and issues that I think staff would take on to look into as we move forward in the future. Thank you for the time.
Thank you so much, Ms. Farnak, for the good responses. And again, to Ms. West for the great collaboration. Any other questions or thoughts from fellow board members for Ms. West or otherwise?
Yes, I'd just like to chime in here by saying that I spoke at a conference a few years ago on the topic specifically of agricultural water reuse. And what strikes me is many of the comments here today that we need to drill down more on the exact use, but also any impediments that may create a challenge. But overall, I think the goal is, of course, as we've all stated, to increase agricultural use of recycled water because you don't have to go through as much treatment as in other uses. And that can be helpful from a greenhouse gas emissions perspective. And just, beneficial reuse. But the project, Chair Esquivel, that you mentioned that I had been involved in many years, the Turlock Series Modesto project, that project aligned really well because as Ms. Farnak indicated, the water use by agriculture is not all year round. And that project in particular has another use, which is the wildlife refuges during a period of time in which the water is not needed for agricultural use. So the stars sort of aligned really well for that project. It's a big project though, so I think hopefully there would be other opportunities because refuges also need additional water, looking at some of the federal policy and redirection of water, which is only a limited supply, and the refuges are always seeking for additional supplies as well as agricultural suppliers. So I think there's, potential for opportunity here, but also just to better understand some of the impediments. Ms. West, I'll follow up with you so that we can continue to have some offline discussions on this. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Vice Chair. Any other thoughts for Ms. West? Well, great. Thank you, Ms. West, again, and look forward to further discussion in the year ahead. There's certainly going to be a lot of great work to be had. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Last, we have up Jared Voskel from the California Association of Sanitation Agencies. Good morning.
Hi, good morning, Chair and board members. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Jared Voskel on behalf of CASA. We just wanted to echo and support Water Reuse's remarks this morning. And we also wanted to convey our appreciation to the board for extending the submission deadline last April and providing those 2 additional months. And given the continuing impact of COVID-19 at agencies, we would appreciate your consideration of another June submission deadline this year to achieve a comparable response rate. As the submission of this data is becoming more routinized at agencies, we think that this would be helpful as they get used to this process. And likewise, in the interim between now and the due date for this year's reports, we do encourage the board staff working with water reuse and the regulated community to refine the survey for the over 700 permittee submissions this year. Somewhat tangentially, as it relates to the issue of maximizing reuse, as you're all aware, there are intense cost pressures for bringing reuse projects online, to say nothing about the length of time from a project's inception to its operation. And so to that end, we are appreciative of the board's Division of Financial Assistance action this past November to lower the cutoff score for fundable projects of the Clean Water SRF thereby making 18 more projects eligible for the 2021 fundable list, which will expand the means through which the state may achieve its goals for water recycling in the years ahead. I would respectfully disagree with our colleagues, Mr. Bothwell and Cooper's interpretation of the figures that recycling has been stagnant. And I couldn't but wonder how, if you updated the numbers for 2019 for the items water reuse flagged, and if you factor in numbers for the projects currently in the works and being constructed, and you also adjusted the figures for the agricultural irrigation in 2019 to reflect the change in Title 22 definitions of reuse to make it more apples to apples, whether such a revised figure for this year would actually exhibit a much more dynamic and successful story about the many great efforts by our members across the state to get projects online. I'd also note the regional variation in recycling that was in one of the slides, and observe that regions 4 and 8 had significantly higher levels, and that attests to several critical factors underlying the viability and feasibility of bringing projects online in different parts of the state. So to conclude, we again want to thank the board, Rebecca and Lauren on your staff for being so accessible to our members, and to all the permittees for their time and efforts in developing the 2019 survey. And we look forward to working with you on this item in the year ahead. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Voskuil. Do appreciate that. And the acknowledgement of the incredible work by the Division of Financial Assistance. As some of you may recall, when we adopted our intended use plan, we did it with a bit of a sort of a trigger, if you will, had a little more of a conservative estimate on how many projects we would end up getting onto the fundable list and through for the year, if, you know, if capacity allowed. And ultimately, and if, you know, certain conditions kind of got triggered there. And because of the good work of the Division of Financial Assistance, they did. And 18 additional projects were put on. And appreciate this board and my colleagues' flexibility. And I know the adoption of that intended use plan and kind of allowing for that. So just thank you. Appreciate the comments. Well, that concludes our public comment speaker cards for item number 4. Is there anything else any board members wanted to leave us with or ask questions of? Again, it was a very exciting item. It's a really incredible data point to now have, to more thoroughly have, so that we can better assess how we're meeting our goals and how to best tailor them to be successful, and that kind of shooting in the dark, if you will. So, well, thank you. And again, hats off. Oh, board member.
Oh, sorry, I was just going to add, you know, one reflection in addition to what's already been said, which is, I just think this is an incredible example of the kind of outcome reporting and tracking that we want to be able to do around these kinds of really key strategic priorities, especially where we have an adopted, you know, policy and resolution. You know, I think overall, just as we're working through our strategic priorities and looking for ways to do this kind of goal setting and then tracking and reflection, I think this is just a great example. And I just look forward to continuing to dig in on how we can continue to set these goals, reflect on whether they're realistic, track them, understand, and just reflect on all of the tools we have to try to achieve those from an outcomes perspective. But I just, you know, echo everything that's already been said, and really I'm excited about it.
Hear, hear. Thank you, board member. All right, well, that I think concludes informational item number 4. Thank you, everyone, much appreciated. And brings us to our final item, which is simply board member reports. I'll quickly start on my end of things, and I think I just had a nice restful period here, and hope many of you did as well, and got some at least downtime in order to recharge for what promises to be, I know, another incredible year, 2021. I like to think firmly now in the 21st century, and hopefully continue to embrace the possibilities therein, if not just at least better understanding the challenges. But let me do a quick browse of my calendar to make sure there's nothing that I would want to necessarily make sure and flag. No, don't see anything from our last meeting. But we'll just add as well that I'd like to welcome Meredith Thompson to the executive team here. She's joining on as my assistant, trying to help myself and Biba as well and on the scheduling side, but to kind of better coordinate us here on the executive level. And so just really appreciate Meredith joining on and want to acknowledge and thank her. I believe she's watching. So thanks, Meredith. That's all I have on my reports. Anything else from other board members?
I guess I'll just, I don't have anything to report in terms of things I've done, but I really am excited about 2021, saying goodbye to 2020, and the opportunities, and also just starting out with some rain is great. I'm excited about, the new work that's happening at the federal level and opportunities there. And just want to do a quick note that there was a appropriation around low-income ratepayer assistance, a drop in the bucket of what's needed, but for water and ratepayer and debt assistance essentially from this crisis. And so I think that's a real opportunity. And I know we're going to be discussing the results of the COVID survey next board meeting, but wanted to give a shout out to that opportunity and just looking forward to this year.
Yes, thank you, board member. Do appreciate that plug. I believe it's about 600 million and change that was provided nationally. If we look at our percentage as a state, by population, may get 60 million or some odd there. A lot of discussion still yet to be had. I think I know HHS is the one that's been given the dollars and will ultimately be standing up the program. So to your point, I think we're definitely looking forward to engaging with the administration around that program and seeing what that looks like and means for our state. So thanks for that flag.
No update for me. Same restful period and looking forward to the year ahead and all the challenges that we're facing, but still opportunities abound. And I think this recycled water update was an example and testament to that. And so, yeah, let's carry on. I would say we're definitely within the 2020. We're certainly in the 21st century, Chair Esquivel, and now definitely in the 2020 decade. So, we'll march forward. So,
roaring 20s. Yes.
Yeah, let's hope so.
Let's hope. Vice Chair, anything you'd like to report or add?
Nothing to add, just ready to roll up our sleeves and have a busy year.
Yes.
Good to see you all.
Yeah, very good to see you all. And well, then that concludes our board meeting for this first meeting of 2021. Just want to thank my colleagues, all our folks here, Eileen and Michael and Eric and Jonathan. Just thank you for always the incredible support. We're looking forward to the rest of the year here. So we'll see you all on January 19th. And this meeting is officially adjourned. Have a great week, everyone. We'll see you very soon.